That was a bit much.
Listen,
One more chance after.
listen.
That's it.
All right, let's see. Public notice of this meeting pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act has been given by the Board Secretary on November 30th, 2022 in the following manner. Posted notice on the school bulletin board at the Administration Building, transmitted to the Courier Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Clerk of Cherry Hill Township. Please join me in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Sugars, would you please call roll?
Mrs. Arroyo,
Here.
Mrs. Stratton,
Here.
Mrs. Fleischer,
Here.
Mr. Mayor,
Here.
Dr. Rude,
Here.
Ms. Stern,
Here.
Mrs. Tong,
Here.
Mrs. Winters,
Here.
Mr. Abadia.
Here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malash. We have a board recognition tonight of student achievement. So without further ado.
Thank you, Mr. Vadia. I appreciate it. I'm very excited this evening. One, because there's such an incredible turnout as we have the opportunity to recognize some of our highest achievers from our high schools. This evening, we'll be recognizing students who are being awarded a National Hispanic Recognition Award, National African American Recognition Award, National Merit Semifinalist students, and National Merit Commended students. I'm going to ask Mrs. Wilson, our Public Information Officer, to join me up by the podium. We're going to go through and introduce the students one by one. Students who are here, if you would come up to receive, we have a certificate for you. We're going to smile. We're not going to shake hands. I know that people are worried about health and all the other stuff that's going on. You can return back to your seat or standing area. After we give out all of the awards, Mrs. Wilson would really like to take the students out in the hallway and get a group picture. You're all welcome to return for the rest of the board meeting if you would like, but it's certainly not a requirement.
Well, and wait. But if you return, maybe we'll do a special student public comment.
Maybe. Mrs. Wilson, will you meet me at the podium?
On the absolute most. You got to deal with this now. Yeah, that's very interesting last meeting.
Good evening. Good evening. I will be reading the names from the certificates. When you hear your name called, please come up. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name. And I believe since we have a pretty good stack of these, we'll just wait and hold applause until everyone has been called. So we'll start with the National Merit semifinalists. First, we have Christopher Shin, Timothy Park, Jamin Nam, Eric G, Box Cheng, and moving on to our next categories, we have the National African American Recognition Award for Latasha Bailey. We have National African American Recognition Award for Lauren Lohman. We have the National Hispanic Recognition Award for Elizabeth Reyes. And moving on to National Merit Commended Students, Alicia Albuquerque, Akshay Anand, Rami Awad, Aryaman Badarwaj, sorry. Evelyn Billett, Jazz Cheng, Vinayak Chidwara, Elizabeth Cohen, Michael Fiore, Joel Kang, Sihun Kim, Nina Lazarovicki, Samuel Lee, Sage Levy, Angelina Lee. Eric Lee, Catherine Lee, Gina Liu, Matthew Matro, Jamie McMahon, Karen Mudahil, Pranav Pala, Sia Patel, Siddharth Pejavara, Grace Renshaw, Vivian Wrong, Aiden Rude, Evangeline Shim, Robert Sims, Justin Tofuri, Harry Turner, Brooke Warren, Benjamin Z, Justin Yang, Grant Yoon, Spencer Yosko, Elena Zhang, and Brian Zhao. That's everyone. Congratulations.
Again, congratulations to all of you. And if you would join Mrs. Wilson out and down the hallway, she would love to take a group picture. Again, you are welcome to return.
Thank you. Thank you.
Still want a big audience then. They're not gonna come back then. We'll let it go. Let it go.
Oh, yeah, you guys go and then come back. Exactly.
Dr. Rude, you should also be in the picture. Like, you should also get up. Yes.
I don't know if they're gonna. Are they gonna be in the? Yes. You can get,
You take the picture.
well, he can get it from Barbara. You know an in to someone taking the picture, I'm just saying. I feel like Like everyone cleared out.
All right, well, this should be fun. Let's go.
Hi, Dr.
Go,
Perry.
next part. Sit.
Oh.
I saw the article. And.
All right. If any students would like, okay, we're gonna move on to presentation for this evening, which is NJ GPA results. Okay, Dr. Malash, would you like to introduce?
I'd be thrilled to introduce. Thank you, Mr. Obadia. And thank you to the board for recognizing the academic achievement of our students and their performance. Again, the recognition of the students that just received the certificates tonight places them honestly in the top percentage of students across the country as measured by an outside externally validated assessment. So we're incredibly proud of the students and the work that they put in to be there. So thank you for recognizing them. Probably don't spend enough time recognizing academic achievement. I'm thrilled to once again introduce Mrs. Faith Holmgren to the board, or reintroduce Mrs. Holmgren to the board. Mrs. Holmgren is here this evening to present the New Jersey GPA results. Mrs. Holmgren, as the board is aware, is our district testing coordinator. She's delivering a little bit of a revised presentation that she originally gave a week ago to the C&I committee of the board, providing information regarding this new assessment that was used last spring. I believe the board was provided with a copy of it ahead of time. There's a copy, I believe, at your seat as well. So you can go through if you want to write notes down. There certainly will be time for questions. If there are questions or follow-up, some of which we can certainly do tonight, some of which we can do moving forward. So Mrs. Holmgren, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here again.
And thank you for having me. As Dr. Malash mentioned, in front of you, you should have two handouts specifically from me. One is the presentation for this evening that you can follow along with either by looking at the PowerPoint on the board or by following in that actual paper presentation. And the second is a supplement which provides further clarity regarding. I've never been told to quiet down or that I couldn't be heard. The second supplement provides further clarity to questions that we received last week after presenting this information to the C&I committee. So once again, thank you and good evening, and let's get started. So as Dr. Malash said, I will be presenting the spring 2022 New Jersey graduation proficiency assessment data this evening. Before I begin, I would like to provide you with some background information regarding the NJ GPA. On September 8th, 2021, which was last fall, districts were notified by the New Jersey Department of Education that we were required to administer a new assessment to all 11th grade students. And this new assessment would be a graduation assessment requirement for all students in the classes of 2023 through 2025. Therefore, in March of 2022, we administered this new assessment to our 11th graders. Moving on to the next slide, you will see there was a shift in direction from the Department of Ed. On July 5th, this past summer, one slide too far, Dr. Mayhem. On July 5th, this past summer, Governor Murphy then announced that the NJ GPA would no longer be a graduation assessment requirement for students specifically in the class of 2023. And instead, this new assessment would serve simply as a field test. Therefore, there is no graduation assessment requirement for any student graduating in the class of 2023. Since this assessment is not being used as a graduation assessment requirement, the NJDOE did provide districts with possible ways in which we can use the results. They include using the results to review our current curriculum and programming, as well as identifying areas of focus in preparation for the spring 2023 administration of NJGPA for our current juniors, which will not be a field test, but will be a graduation assessment requirement. is an overview of exactly what the NJGPA entails. It is designed to measure the extent to which students are graduation ready in ELA and mathematics. The ELA portion of the assessment is aligned to grade 10 standards, and the mathematics component is aligned to Algebra 1 and geometry standards. Students can be placed in one of two categories for both ELA and mathematics: graduation ready or not graduation ready. Here on the next slide, you can find the comparison of Cherry Hill Public Schools Spring 2022 NJGPA data to the state of New Jersey. As I mentioned, you will notice that much different than NJSLA, there are only two categories that students can fall into: graduation ready or not graduation ready. As I mentioned before I began, I also provided the board with a supplemental handout this evening, which allows you to see the percentage of each subclaim in both ELA and mathematics in which students were assessed. And I also provided you with the scale scores that correlate to each of the levels, meaning graduation ready or not graduation ready. For ELA, 48.9% of our students are graduation ready, comparable to 39.4% at the state level. (51.1% of our students are not graduation ready for ELA, comparable to the state at 60.6%. For math, 59.2% of our students are graduation ready, compared to 49.5% at the state level. And 40.8% are not graduation ready, comparable to 50.5% at the state. Looking at the ELA data for our high schools. At High School East, 42% are not graduation ready for ELA, while 58% are. And at West, 64% are not graduation ready, while 36% are in fact. And for your review, I also included the student counts for each of these percentages. Moving on to the mathematics results by school. 27.8% of our students at East, as far as mathematics are concerned, are not graduation ready, while 72.2% are. And at West, 59.7% are not graduation ready, while 40.3% are. On the next two slides, you can find the comparison between the specific high schools and the district as a whole. On this next slide, we start with East. Followed by West. As you peruse this data, there is something that I want to bring to your attention. You may find this presentation and the way the data is presented is somewhat repetitive. I think we could all agree. However, as with my last presentation, I'm using the template that is provided to all districts by the NJDOE. This is how we are expected to present our data. Finally, in the next two slides, I provide you with the subgroup data for both ELA and mathematics. On this first slide, you will find that data for ELA. And the same data for our subgroups for mathematics. So after closely reviewing this data, there are a few notable achievements I would like to highlight. First, for ELA, our district average for students who were proficient or graduation ready is above the state average. And for mathematics as well, The district average for students who were graduation ready is also above the state average. So how are we responding to this data? I will give you a few examples of the many things that we are doing across all of our schools. For ELA, we're using the data to identify specific standards and areas that require additional focus, which we have come to learn is predominantly informational text. We are also utilizing our literacy coaches, technology coaches, and colleague teachers to meet with PLC groups or professional learning communities, as well as individual teachers to look further at the data and develop instructional strategies to address the areas of need. For mathematics, we are conducting targeted professional development presented by the folks at Great Minds for both our teachers and administrators. We are also providing targeted interventions to our students. Just a few examples of how and when these interventions are taking place include Algebra 1 seminar, as well as the Lunch and Learn period, which provides multiple in-person opportunities on a weekly basis. I know this was a lot of information, and being that it is a new assessment, it was a very quick time that we went through all of the data. However, that being said, are there any questions, specific questions that you have regarding this presentation?
We'll turn to board members. Any questions? Mrs. Elmore Stratton.
Sorry, my thing was on. Thank you, Ms. Holmgren, for this. I have lots of questions from the presentation the other day, just because I needed to go back and look up half these things and make sure I know what I'm talking about too. So thank you for also saying what PLC is, because I definitely didn't know that one. But in terms of, so I guess this may not even be a question for Ms. Holmgren, more for Dr. Morton and Dr. Malash, because they probably would know the answer. Just for these strategies that we're using, most of these are like just regular, not regular, but that's like the basic teaching pedagogy, right? So they should be doing this anyway, right? So, and I love that you said that it's more targeted and listed what the interventions are. So in terms of these strategies, are there deliverables that we ask for from the PLC groups, or something that we can actually see later besides this? Because I know it's like ask, teach, assess, go back, ask, teach, assess, go back. So like, will there be another point where we can see this? Because I know that many of us on the board have seen, similar results to this before on other different assessments. So are there deliverables that they're doing, or does it get shown to the admin team? And then like, how do they move this work along, basically, I guess is my question.
Yeah, it's definitely so. The PLC structure provides an opportunity for teachers to engage in conversation around student learning. So that looks like a review of data, a discussion of trends, a discussion of different strands that students may be experiencing difficulties in, areas where one teacher may be excelling and working with the population, and others can share strategies and things along those lines. Typically, what we look for is overall for students to be able to make progress on multiple measures. So we are using benchmark assessments. We're looking for students to be able to demonstrate learning on the content and the curriculum that we've established. We look for report card grades ultimately to be commensurate with or reflective of indicators of success. Things along those lines. I think so. It's within the structure of the classroom. What the strategies as well, I think it's important to understand that the way that intervention works at the high school level is that it typically takes place through the seminar classes. So there are a number of seminar classes. Ms. Holmgren just mentioned Algebra 1 seminar in particular, but there are several sections of seminar that run at multiple levels. So if you figure if a child comes in and has to take Algebra 1 in 9th grade, there's a parallel seminar class that's given for children who may be in need of additional support. And that's married. Something that's being done at this year is that the teacher who teaches the primary course is also teaching the seminar course, so that there's better understanding of where a child may be experiencing difficulty, and you can close the communication gap. That takes place at the geometry level, at algebra 2 level, and also at the 12th grade level. So like NJ GPA data typically is taken, and those children who have not demonstrated graduation readiness have an opportunity to demonstrate that through multiple pathways as well. But the Seminar 12 teacher focuses in on targeted instruction and helping those children to demonstrate their graduation readiness over the years.
That's exactly what I love to hear. So there is from this, and I ask questions just because we're not experts, right? So we need to be able to understand. I know the community clamors for transparency, which is what we have here, but transparency without knowledge is dangerous. So that's why I'm asking these questions. It may seem I not because I don't, you know. And then, so from this, then what we're getting from this, and this is something, again, had to learn. So when they come out of this, once your teachers are doing PLC groups and they're getting those touch points with each other. So then from there, they have the ability to have, I might have this wrong, direct, explicit instruction after that, where they really target into that student and what's going on, so that they have the ability in 12th grade to correct that, right? If it happens in 11th grade, or does that happen from 11th and all through 12th to get them back on track?
So it's two different things we're talking about. So it happens in the moment, ongoing. So once we receive, let's say we receive NJSLA data, it gives us an indication as to where a child is strong and where a child may have areas of opportunity, or there are opportunity gaps coming into the year. The teacher has an opportunity to then target instruction and have a general understanding of where a child may be. So as instruction is taking place in the moment, as the expert, pedagogical expert, I know who I need to target more, who can potentially work more independently, who I may need to differentiate assignments for, things along those lines, who potentially could benefit from being placed in that parallel seminar course, who could benefit from lunch and learn, who could benefit from, after school tutoring, virtual tutoring, things like that. So the targeting that principals, assistant principals, and teachers are able to do is definitely increased from the data.
And I'm sure, having teenagers that have done this, for the students that took this, they have to do some sort of taking up on it themselves too. It's a level of engagement they have to do to go to the lunch and learn, or it's not something that's they have to do, or are they like, oh, you suggested you should?
Now, we cannot force teenagers to do anything, but we try to compel them through, just engaging them in an understanding of where they are. Guidance counselors work with them on where they want to go in the future as well. You do career assessments and things like that. So absolutely, it's a mutual process.
Got it.
Mutual engagement process.
So, and again, just so we all understand, right? So from this, I'm sure, so in terms of what Dr. Morton does, and maybe Dr. Millis, you could answer this as well, or help us to understand, because my major gripe, and I've shared this with everybody, is are we as a board doing what we need to do to provide the admin team with the resources to distribute out to teachers so that these numbers can change, right? And because we've seen these numbers before, we've all seen it be the same. We all have to acknowledge that, and I'm probably going to get hammered for this by the community, but I say many things that I get hammered for. So we all acknowledge that, there's some inherent things that go on in our town that are already going to create a disparity that education, that teachers can't already fix, right? So, and I say that like, okay, we know that there's some students that are going to always get that extra instruction from their parents. There's some students that are always going to have heavy engaged families. There's some students that are, the same way we have disparities with obesity and whatnot, depending on your zip code, is the same thing we have happening here in a town, right? That's gonna happen. But despite that, I, as a board member, want to know what can I charge the rest of my team with that helps to support you? Because one thing I learned is that from all of this, teachers do a great job. They collaborate, they do all those things. But if we as a board aren't providing the opportunity to give you what you need to, or ensuring it's budgeted appropriately for you to give those teachers what they need, then we should just shut up and complain, right? So I need to know what is it that we need to move the needle here? Because we all agreed we got through the let's fix the buildings, right? Like we're good with that. And so we have a lot of other things that we'll probably talk about tonight that we want to make the major project, but I think is this time that this becomes a major project. Some of those other things that we charge this amazing admin team with get pushed to strategic planning so we can focus on this disparity, because I think Mrs. Winters will probably chime in later. I know we have the opportunity now where we have the first level of kindergartners that you said have gone through full year. So can we start some assessing, which I know teachers are already doing, because again, pedagogy, they better be, right? So we know we have the opportunity. Is there other things we can give you? Do you need more assessments? Do we need to budget for more resources? Like, we need to know, because I know at this point, I think this is going to become the next thing that we need to lock in and fix, even though we know all those things we can't fix. We can't fix people's level of education. We can't fix people's level of engagement somewhat. But what we can fix is what we can do to help support you, to help support them, to move the needle in this. So what is it that we need is one of my big questions. You may not have to answer that today, but that's what I need to know, because that's what I want to charge our team with. And then are we backing it up the way we need to? Like, one thing, and now my board team might get mad at me. I know we love to throw things out there and say, now go fix it. But if we're not backing you appropriately in what you need, because we're not asking Ms. Sugars to find $1 million to give you the resources for the assessments,
Sure.
We need to know that, right? So I think, and you guys can chime in. I'm just jumping on this from, and I purposely picked Dr. Morton because obviously this is his thing. I know he's area of expertise in terms of being a turnaround principal. He was selected specifically to do those things, not in our district, but in others. And so we should be using his expertise at this point. So I gave a lot of stuff there, but what do we need to do to move this? Because I'm sure everybody's going to say, hands down, this is an issue we got to attack sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. So that's a thank you for that question. First of all, that there's many layers to it. I think there's quite a bit of information that both myself and Dr. Mahan can provide. But I'll just tell you generally from this, having spent 8 years as a principal over at High School West, I can tell you that the staffing allotment has remained relatively flat. We go through a process where we are very intentional about ensuring that there is student interest, and there's a certain student number of kids that populate each class. We don't run classes if there is not student interest. So there's no fluff really in the staffing allotment at the high school level. With that said, Dr. Damon, Dr. Perry are forced to make decisions about how to utilize, if you think of the pie, how to utilize the pie in the best manner possible to support student needs. One of the challenging things about the pandemic is that the need shifted on us. The need shifted on us. It shifted on teachers, and teachers, became necessary for teachers to be able to focus on like mental health and addressing that first, pedagogy second, and it creates new reality, a new paradigm for everyone. So that's a challenge. I can tell you, like, seminar, the allotment for seminar sections were decided last April, even before we had the data. So we're forecasting, we're trying to speculate what the need may be. And when different things that you don't anticipate happen and they're unprecedented, it may not officially, totally line up with the need. So I mean, the obvious thing, what I'm alluding to, is staffing. So the need for staffing, instructional experts to be able to provide that level of deep intervention at the high school level, I'm certain is something that the principals would tell you is much needed, needed at the elementary level and needed across the board. So
Absolutely. Okay. So Dr. Roche, you want to add to that?
I just wanted to add, and probably not as eloquently as Dr. Morton just went through and put it, but I wholeheartedly agree with him, right? The single most valuable resource that we have in the school district are our staff, right? It's the human resource. It's the largest piece that we invest the budget in every year. It's the most important piece. We know, research tells us, we continue to analyze the relationship that exists between the teacher and the classroom. The child is singularly the determinant factor on what's going to look like as that child progresses through the year. More children that have more struggles need more support, right? Depending upon how many staff we have makes the determination of how much time one staff member can spend with individual children. We know too that the longer that we have children in district, the more successful they are, right? So we tell people all the time, move here sooner, right? Send us your kids. And we know that the parents are sending us the best ones they have, right? They're not keeping the good ones home. They're sending them all into school. And Dr. Morton, again, it is absolutely, and he lived through it as building principal with the transition and the impact of what took place with the pandemic. The needs of children changed dramatically because of the pandemic across our district, exacerbated in some areas of our community more than others and in different ways because of pressures that are placed on family structure and what that looks like and what the finance looks like, in terms of what goes on. Absolutely, the staff is a piece. Flexibility with the staff is a piece. Having the opportunity. We're in a district where we run incredibly efficiently, right? And sometimes probably too efficiently in terms of where we are, especially when we look at peer districts or districts that are near, to us about additional staff that they have available. One of the things that I've been doing over the last month is going out and meeting with staff members in the buildings. One of the questions that comes up often, especially right now, is about additional staff, basic skills teachers, additional staff to provide intervention to students, not just at the secondary level, but at the elementary level. Because again, this is not a problem. This is not a challenge that develops when children hit 9th grade, right? It's a challenge that develops as children progress through a school district. Again, one of the things that's often exacerbated at High School West, when you look at it in comparison to High School East, is the level of transiency of children coming into middle school and high school, right? And that's just a function of the structure of town. There are much more higher density population housing on the west side of town than there is on the east side of town, right? So there's more transition that just exists. That's just a natural. That's not bad. That just is, right? It's part of the beauty of what exists within the community. More children that are coming in that have had different experiences in school, have different needs, diagnosing what those needs are, meeting those needs, preparing children and making up for those gaps, is something that looks differently once the kids get there, so it's a huge piece, and honestly, it's very timely, to come through. I will also put in the piece of, so NJGPA, and again, Mrs. Holmgren has talked about it a couple of times now. She's very, again, eloquent, has been very well prepped and is involved in the discussions at the state level. A field test, right? A brand new test. One of the things that's always intriguing, and they tell us not to compare NJSLA to former tests, but if you start to look at, one test where there's a higher performance in math and one test where there's a lower performance in math, because when you look at the difference between NJSLA and NJGPA, typically students perform much higher in English language arts than they do in mathematics. Not on the NJGPA. NJGPA students perform much higher on the math than they did in language arts. So the question we always look at is why, right? Consequently, they're probably not testing the same things. So there's that other piece of, for a test to be valuable, we need to know what it is that it's assessing. A shot in the dark when they come out and announce an assessment, in September, and then say, here's what it's going to look like, go ahead and test. And then after the test is assessed, say, well, wait a minute, we're going to make that a field test. There's a lot that is legislated and a lot that's discussed by non-educators that has dramatic impact on what goes on. Dr. Morton will also tell you very emphatically that we have never had a child not graduate from our high schools because they did not meet the graduation requirement that's necessitated by the test. We've not had that, right? We have the alternative pathways that exist, and they exist for a reason. These assessments, again, when they originally came up, are to be used as diagnostic tools. They're for us to be able to look at and say, here's where there's an area of weakness in our curriculum. Here's where there's an area of weakness with an individual child. How do we address that, and how do we move forward with that? The goal, the purpose, is to have kids graduate from high school, right? As much of the world is starting to move away from that single snapshot of a standardized test, the weight that continues to be placed on this in New Jersey is a little startling sometimes when you talk about the educational system, to go through.
and I'm sure, you know, we can go into race and culture and all of that and just the systematic biases of tests and everything. You know, but I just want to, I can't stress enough that, like, I know that it's our admin's job and our teacher's job to figure out how do we know they learned, right? But it sucks because then Ms. Holmgren comes here and we only get to see that and say, well, I guess they didn't learn it. So, you know, that's why I feel like we need more of these conversations where we can understand what's happening on the side, and I'm not on the side, what's happening in your everyday, so that we can, you know, maybe sidebar things that are not so pressing as this, because this is super pressing for us. I know everybody else has other stuff to chime in, but I think for me, what I heard, number one, I'm not bucking to be curriculum chair at all. So don't even try. Not even close. I'm good on HR, but I hear staffing is our largest asset and we need to probably invest more in that. And I can't stress enough. That was one of my other notes. We are what, a $200 million district?
It's 230.
$230 million district that operates like maybe a $70 million district or lower.
We run incredibly efficiently, and very lean with staffing, you know, and, you know, we've had the discussions. This is one of the things that, you know, and not to draw the thunder away from the CNI committee meeting, you know, but in CNI, right, we talk about the curriculum office, you know, who are the folks that are focused on curriculum? We have 3 curriculum supervisors in our district. And one, because we added that third position, Miss Adrian, 7 years ago, when we added the third supervisor in curriculum 7 years ago or so. Before that, we had 2 curriculum supervisors for the district. Many other districts, and again, if you can just surf the websites in this area, have individual curriculum supervisors for each content area, you know, to go through. How do you spend, right? So one of my favorite quotes in education is John Dewey, right? What knowledge is of most worth? Right? What knowledge is of most worth? Because I think that's something that you as the board ask yourselves. It's something that we ask ourselves administratively, and it's how we make that determination, right? How do we spend our time? How do we spend our money? We have a finite amount of time that we have children in our schools on a daily basis. We can control what that looks like. You know, at the high school level, it's for 7.5 hours a day, right? Actually 7 hours a day. Sorry, 7 hours a day. Not extending the school day by 30 minutes at the high school level either. Right? As Ms. Elmore Stratton said, I'm not making any of those changes. 7 hours a day. That's a small portion of what goes on for those children. 182 days out of the year, you know, with what that looks like. You start to look like things that go on, illness or whatever. We hope that we get kids in school 175 of those 182 days for that instructional piece. That's not a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be able to do as much as we can. The other frustrating part that I have with this, right? And just to use the language arts piece, do I really believe that less than 60% of the kids at East in this year's senior class are prepared to graduate? I don't. I don't believe that's true in any stretch of the imagination at all. Do I believe that less than 40% of the kids at West are ready to graduate? Not at all. I don't believe that's an accurate or an authentic representation of the academic potential and current achievement, you know, of where those children are. This is it's a necessary conversation, right? It's necessary for the board to engage in this. It's necessary for us administratively to engage in this. This is what teachers are engaging in on a daily basis, right? It's those discussions, it's the planning, it's the individualization that's taking place in the classrooms. Again, Dr. Morton said it. Children's needs look different today in 2022 in December than they did in 2019 in December. Dramatically different in a lot of ways, right? That's stark and that's real. We are placing that upon our teachers. We are placing that responsibility to be there and to continue to drive the academics forward. And they're doing it, right? That they are hitting in many ways what we ask them to do, right? Bigger gaps, bigger struggles, but we have to continue to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all agree there's an uptick in everything right now, right? Climate culture is out of control, everything else. And I know you guys hate when I say this, but that's back to capacity. Because if Dr. Morton is the expert in turnaround, right? But he's in charge of climate, culture, 19 buildings, whether or not the Lewis buildings get clean at night and setting up the chairs for the board meeting, that's just too many things. He doesn't do those things. I'm just using as an example, right? So for $234 million operation, but we're missing a lot of middle level, I'm just going to use the word management at this point, that can help drill this down. And so if that's what we need, then how do we get that? is that a conversation for BNF, which I also don't want to be committee chair of? So we can find some more dollars, because pre-COVID, this was still an issue. Pre-Ms. Holmgren, this was still an issue. Pre-Corinne moving to Cherry Hill when 19 blah, 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 it was still an issue. So how do we put it back and help you? Because I think one thing I shared with the rest of the group is you have a group right now that's going to probably be a little bit more stable, meaning I think maybe only 2 of us are going to have to leave next year. So we need to capitalize on that in terms of this being a stable board, because Dr. Melo should tell you, we've in the last 10 years, we've transitioned over and over and over. We know by today's runoff that elections are unpredictable. So how do we help you in the next 12 months and make it a priority? So I guess my next thing is whoever's curriculum chair, because I don't know, and whoever's board president, however that pans out, I would like to see this be priority for curriculum and instruction. I also would like to ask, of Dr. Meloche, and something I'm sure he'll have to go back to his admin team, is what are their priorities in this? Because I'm for one feeling like I'm a little bit lost on what are our priorities moving forward post bond, because we have 97 things we want to be at the top of and cutting edge of, but I just have one thing I want us to fix, or at least work on fixing, because it's not 100% fixable. That's never going to happen. So I don't know. I say I'll pass on to the next person, but that's my thoughts, and please continue to tell us more about this, because we don't know what we don't know. But I know that we all go home and think, what the heck am I doing on this board if I can't impact the fact that we have those numbers that show up on various assessments at all times in certain snapshots. So that's it.
Thank you. Let me just add though, before turning it to Mrs. Arroyo, that, NJSBA would tell you that student achievement is by far our highest goal. It's actually in the board self-assessment. So I think, your gut's right on. I mean, it's baked into what our governing body says has to be our top priority. Mrs. Arroyo.
I just want to add that when we had our CNI retreat, we had these conversations. And just as a reminder, moving forward, perhaps you have another one next year, and then bring up those conversations again, because I think that was really eye-opening with the experience, the process, what the needs are and everything. It's just about the timeline of how you plan and organize the conversations. But the CNI retreat brought up a lot of these things that still had to be put on the timeline table.
I think it brings up a lot, but it also allows the opportunity for another thing I hammered down everybody's throat, is just the trust factor between the board, whoever's sitting here, and the team that's sitting over there, because we are moving to a great point where we are, Ms. Holmgren can get up here and know that she's going to tell us this, and no one here is going to be on full attack, right? But in past boards, that's not happened. So I want to continue to build on that trust, because they're not going to be transparent and let us know what they need if we don't have their backs, behind the scenes. So that's just my thought. So I agree with you. We need another retreat. Wish you were there doing it, but I'll leave that to myself. But, let's do it again.
So, sorry. No. Dr. Rude. Yes, sorry.
I just want to chime in because I feel like in the year that I've been on the board, the way we talk about student achievement, I would love to see I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, but like, we talk about this ethereal, ephemeral goal of student achievement, but I don't think as a board, and so I'm talking to board members, we don't ever really drill down on what we mean by that. We're just like, district, do better, get out there and do better, make these scores better. But what's better? Like, what I see is that we've beat all the state averages. We have a good school district with smart kids, maybe not all of them, but West didn't as a district we are, but there are numbers that we always need to pressure and push to achieve, to improve. But I think that as a board, we really need to drill down and work with our administration to figure it out, that what is it that we need to improve, and what are some real goalposts that we could make movement on, because I struggle with that part. I don't see any clear goalpost that we've ever asked admin to move forward. And we can say, we can say, like we want to work on, scores on the NJ GPA assessment. Well, that means we're going to need to specifically study for that test. Like you only, with these, I hate the NJ. This is the first time I've seen or heard of the NJ GPA, and it's dumb. The state telling us what is graduation ready or setting, it's rude. It's hurtful to students to have some unknown marker of what is considered graduation ready that in the state half of people aren't meeting. That either means that like we're doing a terrible job in New Jersey, which I don't think is true, or that like the assessments are not structured in a way that are informative. So like I don't think that the assessments that we're seeing in those numbers are the best factor to be driving our board decisions necessarily, because and as Dr. Malash pointed out, like on one test we're doing really well in English, and in the other one we're doing really well in math. And what's the difference? The difference is it's a different test, and we prepare differently. So as a board, I would like to see in the coming year us create or envision, work with that, not just the board, but work with admin to create goalposts where we can actually measure change and see change, rather than just saying make things better. Because if we just say that without any direction, then there's no real measurement. There's no real way for them, for us to say, okay, that worked or that didn't work.
No, I completely agree. We need to,
And-
what is worked
Yeah,
look like, right?
right.
I think it's only gonna be if we ask them what has worked look like as professionals though.
Right.
Because I can sit here and say, I want 95% of all kids that be ready to graduate in math, and then that could be ridiculous, right? So we need to be able to have them to be able to tell us.
Yeah.
Where I hate talking about people like they're not in the room.
I know.
I would like to have administrators tell us, well, this is reasonable. And then maybe we push the needle, which we
Yeah.
always do, because Cherry Hill just has to be the best at all we do. We don't settle for mediocrity, but we want to hear what it is, and then we can agree to it. But like you said, we need to have something, because you're right. All I've heard in the last 30 plus years, and I'm not that old, is that we need to do better. But what does better look like? So again, I think that goes to CNI.
And I have one more thing I wanted to say, that this is more directed at administrators. Like, I feel like I would like to hear, I would like to hear from you what are our biggest problems? What are the problems that we need to tackle? I don't feel like I've heard. I know you guys want to present a rosy picture, but and look good, but I want to know what's the nitty gritty. What are the real, what are the things that you guys are struggling with? And where, I know staffing is one of the big things, but where can we go with that? And also I would like to see creative ways of talking about our students, demonstrating our students' ability that is different from the testing numbers, because we just see these testing numbers and I don't think they mean as much as we want to put in them, but we don't have any other good objective measures to really say that, this is where the district is and this is where we need to go. And especially like this, that I think is like one of the things, like, at West, we see they're struggling with these testing things, but what are they doing well, and what are the parts where they're not, where we can help? Like, I'm suffering from not seeing the picture and just seeing the directive. And so I would, in CNI and all of our other committees, I would love to see going forward for there to be a more robust communication back and forth between the board and the administration, where we can really try to like talk about talk about the issues and understand them better. I'll shut up
Does
now.
that
I'm starting
also-
to ramble.
Just a question to your question though, and I'm sorry, I'm taking this I'm taking everybody's time, but is that what we want to ask during what is the profile of the graduate? Because didn't we have that conversation too? So is that a time for us to, Dr. Morton, Dr. Melos, Dr. Mahan, is that a time for us to say those things, or is it not that? Because 11th grade is not the time to fix it. Right? Or 12, these kids are 12th graders now. So I don't know,
So-
when do we?
That could absolutely be part of that discussion, right? So some of that is, post January with the reorganization to committee, like there's and I think it's a great discussion that's going on right now. There's like some of it right now is the board charging back to CNI of, you all need to have some in-depth discussion as a committee and then come back to us as a group and say, where are we? What are those pieces? We can certainly look at scheduling a separate CNI retreat as we've done in the past, and have those talks about the profile of a graduate. What do we expect? Where do we expect kids to be? What do we expect them to need to know? And who do we expect them to be when they graduate? Absolutely.
So, and I think, let's give this the time it deserves, but I would say this, maybe I hope is an encouragement to board members, who knows? We all got dressed up and came here today. If we have things to ask, there's a value, I think, to stepping back and taking a pause. Dr. Malash is right here. I mean, it's great that he's here, but he is here. Dr. Malash is saying to us, this, if I'm understanding correctly, this is a very politically rigged test. The state puts it out, I don't know, to shame the state. The state didn't do very well on it. I mean, whatever graduation ready is, the number one state in the union is doing, well, I'm not going to use, but it's doing poorly. Let's put it that way. Now we're saying this doesn't have validity in terms of what they're looking at. So a good question to me would be, administrators, what do you look at? Is what you're looking at as disturbing to you as when we see these highly politicized assessments come back in data? Or are you seeing something that gives you more indication that what is happening in our school buildings is producing the results that you believe is correct for student achievement? That could be one question. Question number two, if we're saying maybe we're too lean, maybe we are too lean. There's no point talking around this issue. If we're too lean, let's make it a budget priority. We're going to talk about 100 other things with budget. If we are too lean, there's efficiency and there's being lean, and these are not two of the same things. But to me, what's most, I think, we've got to pause and ask. Now, Dr. Malash and our value subject matter experts are here. Let's give them 5 minutes to give us a little bit, because we can talk around this, but we are inherently political, as is this test. That maybe doesn't matter, but we do need to figure out if we're going the right way, or how to move this forward. So let's give Dr. Malash, a couple minutes just to give us a little flavor here before we sort of keep talking.
So you've heard clearly my opinions about this assessment, right? And the value of it. And if the state thought that it was a valuable assessment, they would not have, at the 11th and a half hour changed it to a field assessment, if they believed that it was something that was valuable. It was there to meet a specific legislative need, which does not meet the same needs that we are looking for, within a school district. We look at a number of factors, right? When we look at the children's performance through the district, again, as a school district, our goal, as stated in our mission statement, carries children through from preschool, those who join us at the Early Childhood Center, all the way through graduation, whatever that time may be when they receive their diploma, that they are ready to go out and make that change in the world. We have a number of different factors that we look at. Who are they as human beings, right? In terms of what options and opportunities do they have after they leave our school? What does that look like for them? Is it going to a 2-year school? Is it going to a 4-year school? Is it going to a trade school? Is it going into the military? Is it going into work? And all of those are real and viable options. Some of it is us as a community having that discussion. I will tell you, I firmly believe, even as superintendent of the school district, there are too many children that leave our high schools and go immediately away to 4-year colleges. Too many, right? Because there are a number of children, and I would tell you more so today, post-pandemic, than pre-pandemic, who are not ready to get on a bus or get in a train or drive 4 hours and be someplace because they just are not prepared to do that. Not because the school has not prepared them academically, but there's a whole other piece in terms of preparation, right? What does the preparation for life look like? We are asking our teachers at all of the levels to do more in terms of preparation for children and to make up for the impact of the pandemic than we ever have before, right? Children literally missed out on life experiences. Part of that was, experiences that would have occurred in school. A lot of that was in unstructured time. A lot of that was in the neighborhood or at parties, whether it be family parties or neighborhood parties or skating, whatever, right? All of those different times when children learn how to interact, when they learn how to navigate conflict, when they learn how to not get along and to solve it. Right. One of the biggest weaknesses and challenges that we find that children have, again, from the elementary up to the high school, is they have difficulty addressing and solving conflict without the intervention of an adult. Right. That's a shift. That's not just a shift in Cherry Hill. That's been a shift across schools right now, right? Because they are so used to being close to or around an adult at almost any time. We don't provide those opportunities, we, society, as opposed to we, the school district. School district now, we have lots of opportunities. There's time in hallways, right? There's time at least recess, there's time at lunch. There are some of those unstructured times. Children are struggling with that right now. Again, we are asking teachers to deal differently with what they see and with what they feel. There's also the reality of one of the things that kids need to do in order to be successful is they need to not be successful in doing something, right? They need to fail. They need to have a challenge. They need to not do well in order to learn how to progress. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's an academic class in school or playing a video game. Right? Video games are great examples of children's perseverance and the ability to learn, the ability to adapt. So many video games, especially the formulaic ones, they go through, there's a map, they're traveling to certain places, they learn how to achieve and get beyond something. That's why children are so engaging. Children love to learn. Right? That's a natural piece. And it doesn't matter child at 5 or child at 18, there's a love of learning that exists. How do we engage that? And what does that look like in terms of what goes on at the school? Those pressures, those lumps of things that have taken place, within our schools are piled up right now, right? There's a huge focus, as there should be, on the social emotional standing of our students and of our staff, right? And it's hard, right? Because things reach a crescendo in a much shorter amount of time. We all see that in our society around us right now. Things reach a crescendo in a much shorter amount of time, right? We see that in board meetings, as folks come out. Our schools are not immune to what goes on in the rest of the world because the children are spending more time, with families and involved in society outside of school than they are inside of school. They carry that, right? And it's the construction of a culture within a school. We spend time with the board talking about culture. We look at, again, what do children do? Who are children, as they get ready to graduate? And that goes through in many different areas. Academics, absolutely important. So one of the things with even talking about how do you measure achievement and what does that look like in terms of growth, it's difficult. So we build district goals in the spring, as we should, right? We adopt them during the course of the summer. Typically, we don't receive these results until the fall, right? So it's a shot in the dark typically. And we went through many years where we would build goals and say, whatever the state test was at that time, we want to make 6% increase. We want to make 10% increase, whatever it is to show that growth in terms of the way the state was looking at that. That's a good piece. I've had people in the past talk about SAT, right? Take out the state test because they've been inconsistent. Use SAT. Folks have said, well, can you just use SAT and use that as the measure and show improvement? And I will tell you, I can guarantee if the goal was that we were going to have an increase in SAT scores, I can guarantee the board sitting here at the table tonight that we will have higher SAT scores next year than we have this year, if that's the goal. Now, if you ask about the methodology, that looks a little bit different because we will not have the same number of kids that take the test for SAT, right? There's a skill in taking a test. Ms. Elmer Stratton said it before. Paper and pencil tests are inherently biased, right? They're inherently biased. There's no getting around that. Plenty of research to show that. Paper and pencil tests are also language-based tests, no matter what they're assessing, whether it's math or science or anything else, right? It's assessing language and the ability to interpret what goes on. As tests change, test-taking skills change, right? And that's a piece in terms of what's being asked, what's being offered, and where are the kids? We're trying to navigate that in real time, right? We are trying to navigate that as the information comes out, and do it in a way not to have, again, as Mrs. Holmgren breaks down this information and works with Dr. Morton and works with Dr. Mahan, and they go out to the schools and talk about these standardized assessments, because we don't want to just throw out everything that's being done, right? We've made some major adjustments in terms of the curricula and the revision of the curricula across content areas over the last few years. That's going to take some time, right? There's got to be a comfort level with students. There's got to be a comfort level with staff in terms of how things are being presented, how things are being learned, and how we are measuring those things, right? So some of it is, kind of bearing forward and saying, we're going to lean into it. This is what we agreed on we're doing, and this is where we are moving forward. In terms of identifying what are specific goals to say, I couldn't even tell you a goal to make for NJGPA, right? I really couldn't, because it would be a guess to say, if we said 70% of kids were graduation ready in one and 60 were, in the other area, it's a guess, right? In terms of what you look at, because again, we don't believe that it's a valuable or authentic assessment at this point, and looking to try and reconcile NJGPA with NJSLA and how those things match, which again, as Mrs. Holmgren said a month ago, the state has been emphatic about the NJSLA scores from last year, not using them to compare to previous year's scores because they are incongruent, right? They are not measuring the same things in the same way for the children who are there. Makes it very difficult because again, it's easy snapshots that are placed out publicly. Again, we get a template for how information is to be presented. These presentations will go on in school districts across the state, right? And they will see similar information. And we did better as a school district than most of the state did, right? And what does that look like in terms of what goes through? So, some of it is the ongoing discussions. Again, I think we have the right people that are leading the charge. Dr. Mahan, Dr. Morton are instructional experts. They are, right? That's the level of success that they brought to the positions in which they are currently seated. That's who they are, that makes a difference. That makes a difference to the principals in the buildings. That makes a difference to the teachers who are in the buildings. And again, our most important resource in anything that we do, and we have to remember, are the teachers who are there, right? It's those people that are on the front lines every single day. They're dealing with the struggles that children have. They're dealing with the struggles that parents have right now. And still we are asking them, right? At the, we talk about the elementary level. We've adjusted the math curriculum. We've adjusted the social studies curriculum. There's been changes that have been put into place in terms of what English language arts looks like. It's been the same thing at the middle school. There's been changes in the curriculum at the high school level. That has to take time in order to be implemented. Things do not move quickly when it comes to educational systems, right? Because then the other factor, no matter what else goes on, is children develop at different paces as they go through the different developmental stages, right? Again, one of the best ways to look at it, it's, in some ways it's going into a 6th grade classroom and lining the kids up by height and determining how they're going to achieve academically, right? We're lining the kids up by their birthday and achieving how they're going to do academically. It's going to look dramatically differently by height in 6th grade than it is in 12th grade, right? And what's that mean for them? Does that mean that they are not prepared to be in 6th grade because they're only, they're not 5 feet tall? Or does that mean they're really prepared to be in 6th grade because they're 5'8", to go through? And it's a continuum, right? Children struggle. The final piece when it comes down is, what does that motivation look like for a child when they sit to take the test, right? There's been lots of discussions in our community about standardized assessments, especially state mandated standardized assessments. Remember, we're not too many years out where we led the state and families refusing to let their children participate in the park assessment. Not too many years out, right? From where that is. The children to sit down and take an assessment, what do they think it's going to mean? Are they directly engaged in what it is? It's a great question, right? I'm not seated there with them. Dr. Morton's not seated there with them. We get feedback from the building principals, from the staff. It could be, right? It could be out there. That's a piece of it, right? What's it look like for the children in terms of when they sit down, so lots of confounding factors, lots of things. And again, in education, so much of what we do is correlative. So little of what we do is cause effect, right? It's things that are happening at the same time, not that we're doing this and this caused that, right? It's very difficult to show causation when you study or when you examine things in education. It's things that happen at the same time.
All right, good. Mrs. Winters, take us from here.
So what I'm hearing from everybody is that CNI is going to be the greatest of all committees next year, right? Because we are going to have very important, profound work to do. Because what I'm hearing from my fellow board members is this is something that we really need to focus on. This, as Mr. Avadi has said, this is actually our major goal as a Board of Education, is to support student achievement. This is our reason for existing. So I think CNI is going to be maybe the most exciting place to be next year. When I'm looking at the board goals, one thing that I see that the board asked for or put in the goals was that district level assessment data was going to be part of how we think about understanding student achievement. What I'm hearing from a lot of board members and what I'm hearing from our experts in the administration is that the state level data is problematic. Maybe it's not testing or measuring what we think it's testing or measuring. Maybe it's not the best way to measure how well our children are understanding what we're trying to teach them. So I think one of the pieces of the puzzle would be to then ask, how do we measure what the students are learning, and how do we track linearly, longitudinally, to see whether there's improvement over time? If the state assessments are not the appropriate mechanism for doing that, perhaps the district assessments are, or perhaps not. But I think what we've learned here tonight is that we as a board really need to listen to the experts in the administration and work together as a team collaboratively to drill down to what this means for student achievement going forward. Because what I'm hearing from Dr. Malash and what we were all hearing is that the pandemic was a game changer. It was like a giant disruptor thrown into the middle of education. I hope we're coming out on the other side of it. As Ms. Elmore Stratton said, this is the first year that the full day kindergarten curriculum that we worked on is going to be a full year of instruction for all of our students all the way through, without masks, without any other confounding factors. I would love to know what that looks like, because now we can have a fuller picture of the impact of that change. There were so many other changes, as Dr. Malash just said. There's a new math curriculum. There's a new social studies curriculum. I think we need to be able to measure going forward the impact of the changes that we're making so that we know whether they're beneficial to our students or not. Because if we don't know that, then we're just going to keep changing things. And I understand there's confounding factors. I understand that, things are not, it's not direct causation. But to Dr. Root's point, I think if we don't know what we're measuring and we're not even trying to measure it, how will we know if we're making progress as a board and doing an appropriate job? So that I think, is where I see curriculum instruction committee going forward.
So let me just a little bit in clarification, and
Of
I
course.
appreciate your words and your vigor, right, for where we are. So, and we'll talk about this in committee. Like there's a piece of this that I think, will transition, and needs to transition into committee. So part of the role of the committee is to turn that charge over to Dr. Morton and Dr. Mahan, who as the leaders, as the administrative liaisons, to say, we need you to define for us, right? What is it that we are measuring? How are we measuring? What is it that you're telling us? And then have them come back and present that to you, right? To give that piece back to you, as opposed to, right? So the easiest way that I always look at it, in the piece with the board is, so the board's role is, right, make that announcement, let there be light, right? So there shall be, but not to decide how many light bulbs or where to hang them or what the fixture looks like. That's where we turn to, again, Dr. Mahan and Dr. Morton and their team and the rest of the folks in the district to say, let us know what that's going to look like, to go through. But I think that's where you are going.
And I
with it.
completely understand and respect the difference between the board's role and the administration's role going forward. But I think, as board members, as a board member, I'll speak only for myself. I would like to do what I think Ms. Arnold Stratton would like to do, and what I'm hearing from the other members of the CNI committee is to support and be collaborative partners in helping, once you define for us what are the goals and how do we measure them, then I say back to you, okay, well, as the board, how do we support student achievement? Because that is our charge. Our charge is to support student achievement, not to run the schools. That is absolutely not our job. And I respect the difference in our positions. But I think that in order for us to be most effective, we need to really understand how this is working and what's going on. And if what I'm hearing tonight, and you can tell me if I'm misunderstanding, if what I'm hearing tonight is the state assessments are not the appropriate mechanism for measuring some of these things, then I would say back to our experts, how do we measure? How do we know? Because that's really what I would like to see the CNI committee focus on strongly going forward.
I feel like they know though. I'm sorry. I feel like they know. They know. They just we haven't asked them what it is. Or
Let's ask.
maybe we might have sat and said, Dr. Maloche, what it is, but we need to know. Because sorry, first of all, Ms. Holmgren, I'm so sorry you've had to stand here for almost an hour now. Like, that's rude. But like, seriously, like, I feel like they know, but do you have the trust in us to tell me? Right? Because we could walk into the building and I could be like, oh, it's dark in here. Joe, turn these lights on and get it light in here. But if he's like, well, you got me with nothing in my pocket and we working just fine because it's not dark, it's kind of dim. This is the best lighting for how we type. Like, I don't know. So I think to double down what you're saying, like, I know my experts know I'm putting my faith in them, but do they have the faith to tell me what it is? Because maybe they want to tell me, but if they're telling it on deaf ears, what's the point?
Yeah, so Mrs. Elmerson, thank you. Let me just go to last comments and we'll try to wrap this up a little bit. Ms. Stern.
Thanks. So a few specific thoughts, questions, I guess. I mean, I think my greatest concern is that we can go back to 2018, 2017, even, pre-COVID, and there were very similar discussions about testing data and other tests, state tests. And actually we see similar trends, although, I think Dr. Malash very well taken about the point about, sometimes it's English, sometimes it's math. But what we definitely see, especially at High School West, is that our students are performing on below the entire average. So the entire state experienced the COVID challenges, right? The entire state were under mandate to go to hybrid learning and shutdowns at certain points. And so there's a reasonableness to at least look at the fact that our students in High School West are below the state average, the entire state, from cities to suburban to urban, so that's a great concern for the next 6 months, because these kids are going out into the world in 6 months, leaving our school district. And, fundamentally, I'm not clear from our conversation how we're going to know, has there been some progress for this number of students who are demonstrating that they may not have some of the skills compared to their peers across the state. That's one piece. Specifically, the algebra seminar. So algebra, if I'm not mistaken, is taught in 8th grade for most of our kids, right? That's the first algebra class. And then the second algebra class is usually sophomore year, 10th grade. Is that usually how it goes with our curriculum? 10th grade? Okay. So these are kids who are these 3 years of math is a requirement, correct? So there are seniors. These kids are seniors. These kids may not be in math class, and their class schedule is probably set for the next marking period, right? So I guess I'm trying to figure out this algebra seminar, who is that applying to? Is that these seniors? Are they in this algebra seminar? I guess that's my first question. Let me stop there.
Let me just talk about the graduation requirement first. And do we think kids are prepared? So the state, in their wisdom, has declared that there's no testing requirement for the class of 2023. Right. So there are very specific requirements in terms of the number of credits that have to be earned and in what content areas those credits have to exist for the children to be there. Right. So then we go back to what courses have the kids taken? Have they earned 120 credits? Are they on track to earn 120 credits? Do they have 4 Englishes? Do they have 3 maths? Do they have 3 sciences, world language? All of those different pieces, is how we make that measure and how we make that determination. Is really that key and critical piece. Kids are involved in a lot more, again, in the school experience than just the day in and day out of what goes on in the classes. And again, we are in the process right now of children are starting to hear, as we're in early December, schools for early action. We will continue to hear from our high school seniors, those that are going on to a 4-year school, what that looks like between now and probably early in April. We'll have children who will matriculate, into a 2-year school. We'll have children who will go into work or go into trade school, for which there is no standardized assessment. We have children who will take the ASVAB, that are going into the military. We'll look at each of those different pieces and see what it looks like, and then see where the children are at the end of the year. The graduation piece is a huge piece, right? How many of our children are graduating, have met what the state has determined, the requirements to graduate, and then have those choices, when they go out into the world. We can guarantee none of them will have to sit for an NJGPA assessment out into the world, when they go through. So that's a plus, but we will use all of those other different pieces to go in. And that's one of the things that, and I'm going to turn over to Dr. Morton, in his work with, Dr. Perry and Dr. Damon and Ms. Giordano, it's that discussion of where are the children, where are they hitting the strides that they need to hit, and what does it look like for them come June. They're having discussions right now about children who could be in danger of not graduating, right? Those discussions start with kids sometimes as early as sophomore year about where they are and what needs to be. As educators and as practitioners, do I believe that we need a test to turn around and say that we have, again, 60% of the kids, that at West, or 40% of the kids that at East that are not ready to graduate coming into senior year? I don't. Right. And again, that's why I will turn back to, the experts and the practitioners that are in the classrooms on a daily basis. I think it's much more robust in terms of the assessments, the instruction, how they're being measured on a daily basis than on an assessment, such as this one. Dr. Morton.
Dr. Malash, I'm actually going to chime in for a second. I just wanted to remind everyone that the way that we present the data, as Mrs. Holmgren has said numerous times, is based on a template that we receive from the Department of Education. A few years back, we actually moved away from the template, specifically because we did not want to have conversations where our schools were being compared to each other. So when we have conversations around the NJGPA data, we're talking about 2 comprehensive high schools. And when we look at the data, not only are we drilling down at the individual schools, but we're really looking at our curriculum and making sure that we are addressing curricular issues and addressing those based on what the assessments are asking. So I just want to be mindful that as we are looking at the data that we received tonight, that we're not going back to where we were many years ago in terms of comparing our schools, because we have 2 wonderful comprehensive high schools that we have a large number of students, all of our students, who are successful in their own way. And I think we need to keep that at the forefront. When you asked us about what are the ways in which students are able to demonstrate proficiency and success in college readiness, there are a variety of ways. They have not all been discussed this evening. So I think we need to be mindful of that when we're talking about the data that's in front of us, because, our students are listening. And although students' achievement is a number 1 priority, I think we need to be respectful in the way in which we're discussing it.
Thank you, Dr. Mahan. Excellent. Yeah, and just to go back to the seminar and the way the seminar is broken down. So that was the Algebra 1 seminar was an example of one level of seminar that's offered. So as I had mentioned earlier, there's multiple levels of seminar that's provided at the different grade levels. There's Algebra 1 typically corresponds to 9th grade. Geometry might correspond to 10th. Algebra 2 may be 11th. And then there's a senior seminar as well. As Dr. Malash mentioned, I lived that experience at High School West. High School West is an incredible community with incredible students, exceptionally diverse students. You have students at all different ends of the spectrum. Some students that are coming in that have been disconnected from education for many years, coming from other countries and things like that. So I know what those teachers do on a daily basis, how they work with kids to help them to grow. If an individual, or I know for a fact that individual teachers have helped kids to grow and make significant growth. It may not be at that level that's stated there in terms of a state average, but for those that walk, that experience together, it's significant. The progress that's that our teachers have helped and continue to help children to make. The NJGPA, it is problematic. I mean, we're spending so much time focused on this. And I guess the best way that I can think about this, I think about it analogous to one of my sons who took his first road test and didn't pass it. So he did not demonstrate proficiency to be able to have, or readiness to be able to have a driver's license. He was unable at the time. He studied We practiced parallel parking. 3 months later, he took the test again, and he was able to demonstrate readiness to be able to have a driver's license. And he drives now, and drives with no problem. And that's sort of the way that this assessment is utilized. It's a first pathway for students to demonstrate that they're graduation ready. I hate the language that's used, the graduation ready language. It's not appropriate, really, in my estimation. And I appreciate you, Dr. Root, for your comments as well. But the second pathway, maybe a few months later, all of a sudden they're graduation ready. If they achieve the mark on that next pathway. I'm very, very proud to say we have never, ever had a student, since this criteria has been in effect, we've never had a student demonstrate graduation readiness as it relates to the standardized test requirement. So, I think there's something that works well, and that has been working well to support our kids.
Let's, I think probably the appropriate place is to push this back to committee. Here's the thing. I think the last question is just to clarify, and I like your driving analogy. I think the question is, how responsive can we be, right? If I take this in April, I get the results in October, September. And I guess the other question has to be, what are we supporting from a central perspective? How much is really being pushed on this individual? Because look, teaching, it's a tough profession, right? It is contracting. I hate to say it all the time, but I think we may as well be mindful of it's a tough life. So I think kick it back to C&I, but I think if I had to discern one thing today, it's we need the expertise, but we need it in a way that's actionable. I appreciate there's always a time delay, but a lot of the results, look similar. The board coming next, I assume, would like to really focus on this, considering most people are staying. So I think that's where we can responsibly leave it for tonight. Yeah. Now we've gone. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Aiden, is that something you want to jump in? Just a closing thought, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to get in before we move on. I appreciate that Dr. Mahan mentioned that students are, watching and listening. I know we may not have any in the room, but I'm sure students do end up following these proceedings, whether it's they go on the YouTube and watch, or we give them recaps. And I just wanted to very quickly ask if someone could, I feel like we've kind of alluded to it, but if someone could mention, sort of just clarify and provide, I guess, comfort in a way for students who may be listening and heard, Ms. Holmgren say that whether we think this assessment is good or not, that in 2024, the state plans to have it as a requirement. But I know that we said there are alternate pathways. So if students are watching this presentation and saying, wow, half of us aren't going to graduate next year, I certainly wouldn't want anyone to come away from this thinking that, because I don't think that is the case. So if Dr. Malash can kind of clarify that and explain that'd be good.
Thank you, Aiden. Yes, we absolutely will clarify for the students for this year, juniors. Discussions will take place, at each of the three programs, at East, West, and the alternative program, about what's expected, what's going to be done, what does that look like in terms of what comes along with any sort of assessment. So good question.
There most definitely will be alternate pathways, and those pathways and the distinctive scores have not been released by the DOE yet, but I can assure you that there will be pathways and we will provide them when they are released.
Right, and then I think just the other thing is that, so Dr. Moore, what you're saying is that we don't let people not graduate.
Absolutely.
So we may as
do
well
not.
repeat that just to
Absolutely not.
assure.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least in terms of meeting the assessment requirement, right?
Okay.
Meeting the graduation
So
requirements.
you have a
as Dr. Moore
friend in your building and
that's
central
correct. We've
administration to
never
make
had a
sure.
child
Okay.
not graduate based on the requirement for the state assessment. That's never been the issue. We certainly have had kids that have not graduated for a variety of reasons on time, but never because of a state assessment to go through. And I again, Dr. Morton's brilliant with, the road test, the driving, in terms of preparation, where our kids, goes back to the whole developmental stages, with where kids are, right? It's a process. Remember, our goal, your role as Board of Education, our goal Our focus, we want kids to be successful all the way along. The goal is they graduate from high school and they're prepared to move on into the work. And again, that's a different time frame for different kids.
Can you just, I'm sorry, I know you want to close, but can you please also acknowledge that none of us like the wording that's used. We're using the wording because that's the wording that the state requires us to use and how it's reported back. But there's not one person on this board that defines a child in this district as not ready or proficient. That's not how we walk around and look at our students. Everybody in here can agree that we look at our children as, have we given you the tools that we need? And if we haven't, how do we do better and do more? So I just want that's got to be a statement on behalf of all of us and not just the school team.
Absolutely, Ms. Elmer Stratton. It's children are human beings, right? Education is a human-centered factor. Again, I'll go back to, the most important resource we have in our district are our staff members, all of them, secretaries, educational assistants, the therapists, the teachers, and what the teachers do with kids, singularly the most important thing that goes on a daily basis. The other valuable part are those kids, the nearly 11,000 kids who are here. That's the center. That's the most important piece of what goes on. A test score does not define a child, right? It does not. And we all know one of the great things, one of the reasons that people come here is because we provide alternative programming for many children, whether it's with a 504, whether it's with an IEP, whether it's without any of those, but modification and individualization in terms of what goes on so that children can be successful, right? It's a hallmark of what goes on at Cherry Hill. It's who our people are, right? That's the center of what goes on. Yes, the tests are there. There's been a renewed interest, right? We were just having a conversation recently about the impact of No Child Left Behind, what happened to comprehensive high schools, what happened to alternative type programs and additional programs that we're trying to rebuild and get back in, because again, there's huge gaps experientially for children in our high school programs. It's frustrating, right? It's incredibly frustrating. And I don't think, and Dr. Mahan, made some great comments as we've had discussions through the years. An individual test, an individual set of test scores does not define a population. It does not define a subgroup. It does not define, it's a piece of information that is there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you
We
for having me.
appreciate
I
you.
will be back in January to present the Start Strong
Right.
results.
Oh man, if you dare. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's perseverance. We appreciate, Mrs. Holmgren, your perseverance and your expertise. Okay. I almost am afraid to go. Are we okay to go, Sally, to correspondence? Is that going to be all right with you? We don't. Correspondence is next. Who'd like to report? Quickly, if you would. Anybody? I went to Joseph. It was magically wonderful. I enjoyed every minute of it. I did sing along, certainly in my head. And man, those Canaan days we used to know. Now, number 2, I went to Illuminate. The township did a nice job, or whoever put that together, and it was lovely with my family. So all good for me. Next is Ms. Stern.
So on the 6th, is that right? No, today's the 6th. Sorry. On the 30th, November 30th, I went to the preseason showcase of speech, debate, and ethics teams at East, which is some of those are relatively newer in the past few years, or maybe past 2 years almost. And it was fascinating. I haven't been to anything like that in probably 40 plus years, or something like that. So anyway, it was great. The kids were great. Really interesting topics, definitely relevant topics, poetry, just on, quick on their toes. There was a relative of one of the board members who was one of the students involved. It was a great night. It was really interesting and well done. I was glad we were invited. So that's it.
I also went to Joseph and it was phenomenal. And I want to give a shout out to all the younger students who were in the show, the elementary school students. Some I knew were going to be in it. Some surprised me. I had one of the Girl Scouts from our Girl Scout troop was in it, and I was really happy to see her there. But they were great. And I also just want to give a shout out, not just to the cast, but also the crew of Joseph and the musicians. They did a phenomenal job. And it was really wonderful. And I'm looking forward to seeing many more performances at both East and West.
I also went to the illuminations for the township with Mrs. Stern and Mrs. Tong. We were there and it was so well attended that I didn't even get to see Mr. Ovadia and his family. There were hundreds of people there. So it was really an amazing event. And it's great to celebrate the light. That's what it was, celebration of all different cultures and the light that goes through all the different cultures. And we had I saw West sing. We had many different groups singing and dancing of all the different students around the district, whether it was with private dance groups or, you know, different religious groups. It was wonderful. So that was a great way to start off the holiday season. Thanks.
Okay. First public comment. You have arrived. There are 2 opportunities for public comment this evening. First public comment section is for board action items only, 17 to 20. There will be another public comment section on any topic at the end of the meeting. If you are a student, you may comment on any agenda item during this first public comment period. Please identify yourself as a student. Online and S would be lovely. If you would like to speak now, please identify the agenda item and clearly state your name and municipality, unless you're a student. We'll alternate between speakers here in the room and those that are online. Each speaker will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. The timer on the screen will indicate the amount of time you have remaining. Cherry Hill is a community that values education, and educational topics often bring out a passionate response. The Cherry Hill Board of Education supports a school climate in which our diversity is a source of strength and all are included. Respect is foundational in how we treat you, how we treat each other, and how we support administration and staff in their essential work. Please join us in practicing the utmost respect for all. By convention, we'll start in the room. Seeing none, we will then move online, where we do have Dr. Podowitz, I think. 8-8, that is you. And the floor is
Okay, my name is Jeff Podowitz and I live in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. 17.1, approval of attendee at conference workshops. We're talking about C, Assistant Superintendent Wethington, conference access and equity for all students, a cultural proficiency and certification program, virtual. Please go to the website, the Center for Culturally Proficient Educational Practices. Look at the teaching rubrics under phase 3 of the course. Use trainer of trainer models to prepare participants as certified training associates. What is the name of the certifying organization? Will any data that is not readily and available to the public concerning our school district and our students be shared with this organization on the website under overcoming barriers or under overcoming barriers. Identifying the barriers to cultural proficiency, provides persons and their organization with tools to overcoming resistance to change. The barriers to cultural proficiency that are listed are resistance to change, systemic oppression, unawareness of needs to adapt, and a sense of entitlement. Example given on this website. It is rare to find a person who doesn't acknowledge that racism, ethnocentrism, sexism, and heterosexism exist in our society. But what they often fail to see is when one group of people loses rights and privileges due to systemic oppression, that rights and privileges to others is often unacknowledged or unrecognized. All right. In our Cherry Hill school system, the power our administration already wields over their employees, students, and the community at large makes the course redundant. Please vote no. Also from this website, please also read Disability Solidarity, completing the vision for Black lives from the Harriet Tubman Collective in Harvard Kennedy School Journal of African American Public Policy, 2017. Thank you very much. I'm asking you to vote no on this because I don't think it'll have, I don't think it, like I said, the administration pretty much has control. I don't know. Please vote no. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Podowitz. I've committed your phone number to memory in a good way. Anyone else? Did you want to?
Is it on?
So the deal here, unless you're a student of the district, is that you need a something that we'll be voting on tonight. So something between agenda items 17 and 20. If not, there's a second public comment that we'll get to at some point, that is really open topic. Is that fair?
Advocacy for.
Oh, so that's not on the agenda tonight. So for public comment two, perfect. But not this one. All right, great. We'll close public comment one. And we will move to board work session. So Mrs. Arroyo, if you could start us off with C&I, please.
Thank you. So we had a long discussion. You participated in some of that today with the presentation that we just saw. We did have a closed session for a discussion. Then we had the nursing services plan presented. That's something that we do every year and we have to vote and approve of it, right? Okay. And then we pushed back climate change conversation. I did ask Dr. Mahan, I think sometime in the summer to start looking into it because of the guidelines or something that came out from the governor's office on climate change. So, but that's been pushed back. We didn't have time to talk about that. So that was pushed for January, along with the American Sign Language and online program conversations has been moved to January. Dr. Morton presented on the course of study update and the new proposals, which had two that were introduced: Unified Art Class and Philosophy 1, the Ethics and Art of Thinking. Dr. Morton, do you want to go into detail about the two?
Two exciting new courses. The Unified Art class will allow our children in special education programs to also be merged with general education students. It builds on success of like a unified physical education class that exists. Really exciting, something we're looking forward to. The philosophy course is an ethics course, very relevant and very needed in this day and age. So another course that we're definitely looking forward to running as well.
Thank you. And then we had a conversation on preschool expansion, and Dr. Mahan provided us with some information and next steps on looking at what it would look like to apply for the grant from the state. And Dr. Mahan, do you just want to go into a little bit about that, and then we'll chime in?
I would just say that right now we are looking for providers within Cherry Hill to partner with us so that we can have the necessary number of classrooms. As I had mentioned previously, we have to be able to service 90% of our universe within 5 years. That means that we would need approximately 116 classrooms to service all of the 3 and 4-year-olds in Cherry Hill. And secondly, we will be meeting with all of the preschool providers in town just to let them know that we are beginning to explore the preschool expansion grant, what that would mean for them as a local provider and how we could potentially partner.
Thank you. So this is, there's a lot of planning and work going around with this. So as it moves forward, I'm sure C&I will be having conversations about that in the future. I did want to add that part of the conversation regarding the NJGPA results also led us to talk about the results, the assessment that she presented on earlier in the year in the fall. And then just some of the needs that again, the team needs. And so we did talk about bringing on additional curriculum supervisors. And so if that's a conversation that hopefully we'd like to have BNF have a conversation about, and I guess HR would be another one. And then obviously having the team outline what that looks like. Based on conversations, I think, perhaps reaching for two to support some of what we're looking for, especially with the new curriculum changes and everything, that we've implemented throughout the years. At least since I've been on board, that would be helpful in terms of all of this work. And then as you guys decide on what the next steps are for CNI, Dr. Mahan and Dr. Morton are super helpful in outlining some of the things that come down out of nowhere from the state that we have to stop and prioritize, and then the things that we need to prioritize. That's it. Does anybody want to add anything?
I just want to add, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I'm going to do it anyway. One of the things that we discussed is the enormity of the task of looking into the preschool expansion and applying for the grant, which is a massive undertaking. And so as a board, we need to have a conversation and think about how we get them some staffing help, like interns, administrative support, something to make sure that they're not overburdened in going through this task, because it's going to be a big one. And I think it's important for us to talk about the fact that they may need additional help.
Thank you. Do you want to, anyone else want to add anything? Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you. Choosing the order of things, the two curriculum supervisors, that's good to know. Okay. All right, BNF, Mr.
So very timely conversations about the heavy lift that BNF is going to be having, because we started in our committee meeting talking about budget. So the board has, been asking to kind of be more engaged in the budget conversations, and Mrs. Sugar has provided a tremendous amount of really helpful information to kind of have to springboard our discussion. So it's very early, but this is for the budget for obviously next school year, 23-24. So we had a nice look at, and this is something that was put in the backup for the committee, and it added to the committee agenda minutes that everyone hopefully will get a chance to take a look at, because it was something we got at the committee meeting, but it's now in the folder. We actually the breakdown of our fixed costs. So we know that, and this was discussed at our meeting, that under 75%, about 73% of our budget is salary and benefits, which is actually very good, because NJSBA says 75 to 80% is usually going to be. So we're under that. Maybe it's not so good. Maybe we take a look at changing that a little bit, but we looked at the costs of all our other costs, which is really in a budgetarily, you have your staff, and you have your benefits and your there's not, that doesn't get any less over time. You don't usually make changes there. It's not usually what's you make changes out of other costs. So no surprise, transportation was at the top of our list of our greatest cost of our fixed costs, and as a percentage, and that continues to be a challenge. So we talked about that. We talked about we will be the new board that gets seated in 2023. We'll be discussing the topic of every year we have an opportunity to look at our tax levy. Our tax levy, we can go up to 2%. And in several past years, we've actually kept it under 2%. But with inflation being what it is, and some of the things we're facing, we'll have that conversation down the road. We also talked about in order to remain competitive as a district, we need to make sure that we're providing benefits that are similar to other districts. Actually, there was something that went around that some of us shared yesterday. There's a district, just as an aside, that, there's districts that are giving signing bonuses. There's all kinds of competition to hire. So, not that was a discussion in our committee meeting, but the discussion that was in our committee meeting is how do we make sure that we're providing the types of benefits that keep us competitive? And one of those pieces that we're going to have to take a look at as a board is that we know that we're going to have making sure Paul's not correcting me on something. So one thing we know is next year we will need to take a look at improving our health benefit offerings for our newly hired employees who currently we're not competitive in that area. And that's going to add a significant cost to our benefits in our budget. So that's money we're going to have to look to. How do we figure out where we find that money? So lots of moving parts with BNF, not to mention the fact that we also want to look at our staffing because we want to make sure we're supporting our number one priority, which is achievement, right? So there's that. We're going to be getting money from the School Development Authority. So we talked about how we want to apply that money again this year. We'll get that money, and also that's going to be $258,632. $258,632. So similar to what we got last year. So we talked about priorities. Some of the suggestions were from Mrs. Sugars and Bob Garrison putting it towards HVAC. We talked about maybe there's other ways we want to use the money as a board in terms of our priorities, enhancing. We really want to focus, as Ms. Elmer Stratton said earlier, we really want to focus on doing things that enhance our education of our students, right? And prioritize our education more and more. So what can we do with this money is for buildings work. What do we do with that? So we also talked about the bond oversight. There's going to start to be more work being done. Everything's very, it's not a whole lot happening right now with that, but there will be more engagement with the board in terms of some of the work that the district is focusing on, the construction projects. That's going to start happening in the new year. And also there's going to be kind of the small work group that the board members sometimes rotate into and then share out updates, probably on a quarterly basis. We're also going to have stakeholder groups that meet on a certain basis to really address communication that's going on, talk about pain points. So there's that was the discussion. So great ideas about how do we communicate to the community. This is the work that's being done. How do we keep everybody up to date, including the website, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff that's in development and in talks, and I look forward to that in the new year. A couple more things. We do have a grant writer that we've been, a grant writing firm that we have as a contractor. We're not really sure if we want to continue with them next year. There hasn't been a huge return on investment with them. So that's something we talked about. Perhaps we offload in the next budget. And last thing, but not least, is that we had just a revisit of the fact that there's an ongoing outstanding meal debt that has of $27,000, which is more than it usually is. But we, from previous years, however, this is also, families are getting back into accumulating debt, which we haven't done because last year meals were covered by the government. And so they're not this year. So, just there's a lot of work being done to just educate families about that and understand that. And that's something we'll have ongoing conversations about. So long list, but that's where we're at. Questions, additions from the committee members?
I think you covered it very well, but I just wanted to add that's part of the conversations that we had earlier, whether it's through CNI, HR. We recognize on BNF the importance of supporting these efforts, supporting administration. And as Mrs. Stern said, we did talk about what can we do now, or what can we look at with respect to some monies that are coming in. It's facilities monies, it's buildings money, but how can we most efficiently use that in support of educational opportunities, as opposed to just building out space. And I'm just using that as a term. That's going to be a theme I think we're going to be focusing on a lot. What can we do in BNF? And with, you know, the magic that we're going to hope that Ms. Sugars can help us with some budget Tetris and finding ways to support some of the ideas and some of the creative projects that we know administration will come up with, that how can we truly be a partner financially, as well as just wanting to help give guidance and listen to to you as experts. But as far as the update, and you covered everything that we discussed, and a lot of work, and we're looking forward to doing it.
Mrs. Arroyo.
Just about the grant writer, are you looking to not continue in general with that specific agency and then re-releasing the request for a new one?
So we didn't go any further in our preliminary discussions. We said, you know, it's not a huge amount of money, about $30,000 a year, but it's in our budget and maybe we could use it for something else. And I think, you know, we have the CTE money, which is focused on partnerships. Maybe that's a different direction that we're going in. We just want to make sure the money is being used wisely. So we haven't gotten further about what next, but that was just the initial discussion.
I would just suggest in tweaking the contract language instead, or having different, like write the scope differently so that you lay out expectations from, instead of letting go of that concept, because I think it's still a good idea to have one. But you know, just my opinion.
Thanks. That's great. This is Ms. Elmer Stratton. That's something.
When do we, what's the, I know with the timeline, I think was in our folders, but when exactly do we have that full budget conversation? Is that after reorg? Did we do that? Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, really, we'll continue them ongoing. And then I would say end of January, early February, we'll have them more robustly, because this is actually the time period when departments are putting in their budgets. So this is really early, but in a good way. It kind of sets us up to have the information we need to then have those conversations. Other questions or comments? Oh my goodness. Wow.
I
Go for it.
apologize for distracting you. I just wanted to mention that with respect to the employee contribution for the first 2 years, I wanted to just recognize the efforts of our Director of Human Resources, Ms. Adrian, who has been really pressing this for even prior to COVID. So it's definitely something that we should be looking at.
Oh, thank you. So, and just to clarify, maybe because I didn't go into great detail, but because I know time is of the essence, but we are not providing the same level of health benefits that a lot of other districts do in terms of our contribution as a district for the employees' families in the first 3 years of their employment. And that makes us under competitive. So Mrs. Adrian is, yes, definitely beating that drum in a good way. But we have to find the money for that. And my understanding is we're talking about at the very least, probably $1 million, that this is going to be on top of our current budget. And probably it could be way more. It's hard to know, because if we make that change, there will be employees who are, let's say, maybe a year into their employment, who will then be eligible, who may not have participated. So there's a lot of moving parts. But thank you for, definitely hard work. And also Mrs. Adrian, Dr. Malash has brought it up to us. I mean, I think it's definitely, we want to support those initiatives and those efforts. We want to continue to be an employer of choice, as we say. So it ties back to HR. So we all tie in together. So thank you. Mr. Avaya.
It's actually, it's nice and fitting that BNF goes after CNI. I mean, it definitely seems like, plan for the two, curriculum supervisors, competitiveness. I mean, I think my record is clear. It is mission critical. There are 590 districts in New Jersey. They're all hiring. Okay. Number three, I do wonder if there's something to learn. So Dr. Root is saying we need support in applying for grants. Keep in mind, if I'm not mistaken, we'll forget the $113 million of alternative funding. We'll forget that for a second. I'm past it. I believe we've had the most successful year in terms of attracting grants this year. That has not come through our provider funnel. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, let's first clarify that.
So, and I'll ask Ms. Sugars to weigh in too. In terms of the dollar amounts that we've received from competitive grants, we received more in the 2023 calendar year than we have in a number of years for the competitive ones, which, you know, what led the way was the CTE grant from the Department of Ed that was applied for. And again, the dollar, I don't know, Dr. Mahan or Dr. Moore, if you remember the actual dollar amounts. I want to say we applied for like $130,000 and we were awarded 165. Does that sound right? We were awarded significantly more than we applied for. And we did, excuse me, receive other grants. Ms. Wilson has received two $10,000 grants, you know, in the past year. Some of those were grants that came from outside of the work with the grant folks, and some there are other ones that came from inside as well.
So circling back, I mean, Dr. Root is saying, look, we need grant support, you know, for proposal formulation for preschool. I wonder if there's a model, kind of to Mrs. Arroyo's point too. I mean, do we look at the success that's being done now unaided and see what budgetarily could be helpful in kind of boundary expanding, you know, capacity expanding for those unique opportunities that we think are a good idea, because we don't be chasing money either. So, all right. So those are three things that sort of dovetail between the two committees. Anyway, that's great.
That's it. Thank you.
All right. Next, Mrs. Elmore Stratton, that I believe wants to stay on HR based on previous comments. And so we'll turn it over to you.
100% do. Please do not put me on anything else. HR, we talked about lots of things that I won't talk about here, but the things that I can share. We did discuss some job descriptions that will be up for us to vote on, not tonight, but they'll be coming. That's some of the things we talked about. The next thing I can share is that I'll just say this: Miss Adrian is doing and her team is doing very well in looking at where we are in terms of how to say this right, rates and steps and all that good stuff, and trying to find the best way for us to move the needle in the way that helps us to attract more folks and also gets everybody in an equitable playing field. Not that we're not, but again, we always can do better. And so we're driving for that. The other thing I can share is that we also talked about a specific job description for a position that is filled, but it's a new description, not a new position. So just some wording changes there as well. And then, you know, to go with the theme of the night and the theme of everything that I think I repeatedly try to say, if you don't know, now you know, I'm pushing for us to take the next step and help to get more assets, and more assets meaning more amazing staff people to help us help our learners and move forward. So with that being said, I hope everybody has already liked and shared about our diversity job fair coming up December 15th. We did talk about board members, if you would like to be there, just to support the team as they are trying to do their very best to attract the best folks. And I believe there's also going to be some on-the-spot interviewing happening potentially as well. So lock that in. I don't see anybody putting that in their phone, but I'm assuming you already have it in there. December 15th from 4 to 7 at Cherry Hill High School West. And we talked about some of the places that we have been advertising. And again, Ms. Adrian, she's a vet at this, so she has really done a great job with making our marketing as diverse as possible. And I'm sure that's been in conjunction with Ms. Wilson, I believe, as well. One thing I did highlight I wanted to share is that, and I think I'm able to share this, I'm pretty sure, is a piece of collateral that is used as we go out and recruit. I really liked that Ms. Adrian shared this with us, and I can pass it around if you want to check it out, but it really tells a nice, neat, all-in-one story about our district, and also what people can expect in terms of putting right out there what's the benefits of being on our amazing team with our amazing folks. So this is something that Ms. Adrian, I believe, had developed, noticing that we didn't have collateral. And so she worked with our team, with Ms. Wilson, to put together. So this is something that you can definitely share. I think it has a QR code as folks are into that now, that'll lead right to the application. So please like and share that. And then, just, I think I can't really share much else, which is why I love HR. Yeah, I think the push right now, I think we've said it enough times. We need dollars. And so to go back to what Mr. Mayor said, that 2%, we got to go past it to get some more folks. So just throwing that out there for everybody to think about when we get to budget time. Okay, takes money to bring in people, just saying, can't stay the same, can't do it without an investment out of our pockets, but that's okay. So that's all from HR. I want to stay on that team. Please don't move me to another one. Thank you. Miss Adrian, did I cover everything? Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sometimes it's hard to understand what people really mean, so it's always. All right, on to P&L with Mrs. Fleischer.
Thank you. So we do have some interesting things to talk about tonight, but I do want to briefly go over in the committee meeting other items that we talked about. So the new stress estimate policy, there were no revisions that came up. The code of conduct update, Mrs. Wethington provided an update. She had met with teachers about that and actually spoke with them about restorative practices and train the trainer that hopefully will be worked on coming up. A legislative update, Mrs. Wethington just talked about some of the things happening in the state that may be coming up. And we have no first reading policies, but the second reading will be P2415.5, Title I School Parent and Family Engagement, and P2425, Emergency Virtual or Remote Instruction Program. And then the last is P5512, Harassment, Intimidation, or Bullying. All those are second readings, and those will be up at the next meeting. So the major issue that we spoke about was redistricting update. So in the spring of 2021, the Board of Ed charged the administration to research redistricting the elementary schools. Our district goals for this year of 22-23 also reflect that idea. At our December 2nd P&L committee meeting, the administration presented the members with their research, supportive data, and a plan. After thorough debate and deliberate discussions, the P&L committee is bringing forth tonight its recommendation. We recommend no elementary school redistricting at this time. The elementary school boundaries will remain the same and there will be no changes. Mrs. Wethington, can you please show the board the information supporting this decision? Thank you. And we would thank Mrs.
Fleischer,
Wethington
Dr.
for.
Mahan was hogging the microphone. She wants to speak now. All right, so Mr. Plavinsky is going to queue up the presentation for me. Roll up to the district goals. Yeah, it's like weird. All right, so as Mr. Plavinsky's queuing it up, I'll just jump in to reiterate what Mrs. Fleischer said. The committee was formed in, I have to go back to my own notes, in March, April-ish, based on the board's direction after middle school redistricting to now look at elementary school redistricting. And this is a major activity under the board goal, connecting beyond our classrooms. And during that time, board members may remember around March of this year, we had a conversation talking about board priorities. We asked, what do you want us to focus on as we're looking at redistricting? And we talked about the board's top values were minimizing transportation disruptions, prioritizing diversity, considering special programs. Special programs in that context meant students with disabilities, special education, and ESL, ELL, English language learners, and then minimizing disruptions to students. So we started the work in March 2022, formed the committee in April, spent some time looking at data, gathering and analyzing, and we're here in December presenting our recommendation to our options to the board. And then we will be finalizing the boundaries as per the board goal. Terrific. And it says February. Mr. Polminski, you can go. Oh, perfect. Just go one more. Right. One more. Yep. Perfect. Okay. So as Mrs. Fleischer said, one of the options that the committee discussed was maintaining the existing elementary level configuration. We looked at a lot of things that the district could do, and I'll talk about that in further slides. If the board chose to maintain the existing configuration, there are a few policies that as a committee, we thought the board should look at and perhaps revise. We went through the exercise of creating a new map. It looks very different from the existing map. We just talked about reassigning students based on the boundaries established in the new map. This would disrupt about 450 to 500 students and their families. It would impact students in 9 different elementary schools. It would also require staffing moves. Now, there would be a small benefit to transportation. About 10% of students would have a shorter bus ride. But overall, there's very minimal impact on racial diversity, which was one of the themes that the board asked us to look at. There would be an impact on special class programs because if we were to relocate students, we would need physical space in other schools. So we may have to relocate some special programs if the board went with revising elementary boundaries. There would be some impact on ESL services and minimal impact on in-class or pull-out resource services for students with disabilities. The board also talked about prioritizing diversity. When we created the second map, we thought we might gain some traction in that area. We did not. There was minimal impact on racial diversity if we were to utilize a new boundary map. The only option that we could think of from this perspective would be to transport students across town. And we decided it was just not a beneficial option. It would be very disruptive. And we weren't even sure that we could get bus routes because we would be in a very different market than we are right now for transporting students. We then talked about relocating some of the special class programs. So every elementary school in the district would have some special class program. This would have impacted about 100 general education students who would need to be relocated to a different school to make space for the special class program, and about 50 students with disabilities who would then attend a program in a different school. We decided this would be a very challenging option because it would be so disruptive to students, to their families. There would be physical plant issues. We would have to look at some of the buildings that we were trying to relocate programs to. There's also a possibility that we would lose the in-building continuum that we like to have so students can continue in a program in the same building for the duration of their elementary career. Oh, perfect, thanks. So we also talked about creating a universal ESL program. Currently, our ESL program at the elementary level is sheltered English instruction. We have a push-in and pull-out instruction with an ESL teacher in 8 elementary schools. We talked about expanding that to all 12 elementary schools. This is still a very good option. It does not require any redistricting. We could just choose to do this as a district. It's beneficial to students and the families. So I said earlier, if the board chose to maintain the existing configuration, there are some policies they'd have to look at. The first is class size, which is really a regulation. In our district, we have limits on how many students can be in a elementary class K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we would recommend that the board go back and re-examine that policy, maybe add some provisions for waivers of that policy. Oh, I'm sorry, K to 5. There's no 6th graders in elementary school. And then attendance area policy for students who are forced enrolled to another school, meaning they enroll in their elementary school. We don't have physical space. They're forced to another school. They are permitted to attend that school. Their siblings are permitted to attend. They're all transported. That's another thing that if the board wanted to maintain the current configuration, we would recommend that you look at that policy also and see if there's some flexibility that we can add to that policy. And I think that is it, Mrs. Fleischer.
Thank you, Mrs. Weathington. Thank you so much to your team and for yourself and Dr. Malash for all the work that you've done. Just a point of reference is that by not redistricting the elementary schools, there is absolutely no change that has to be made to a policy. So there's no official vote that has to be taken for this. But we're going to have a discussion and see how everybody feels about this. As far as any of the policies that need to be changed or the procedures that need to be changed, the thought process is that in January, we will start looking at that in the P&L committee and having discussions about what that is. So when we get for these procedures and the policies, it's at that point that we can really have any debates or really deep discussions on specifics. So at this time, I want to see if anybody first on the committee has any other comments or any questions to bring up. Mr. Abadio, do you have anything, comments or questions that you want to state?
Well, when asked, I always have something. So universal ESL, could you walk me through just a little bit, and then would that go now to CNI next, or would that stay in policy to be evaluated?
So, Mr. Vadia, I'm going to start and then turn it over to Dr. Mahan. So we currently provide services in 8 schools. So that means a student who may require the service may have to attend a school other than their home school. So we would be saying providing it universally means we would offer in every school in the district. Now, there would be staffing implications. We would need additional staff. And the board would have to, again, we've been talking about staffing all evening. The board would have to approve the additional staff. But it would be a beneficial service for kids and their families. And Dr. Mahan can talk about more specifics if you need that.
No, I mean, I think I'm okay. I think the benefit would be that they would be going to school with kids closer to their neighborhood.
They would remain in their neighborhood school. The other part is students who are eligible for special education and require ESL. It's really challenging to program them in the right school because they may have one service in one building and we have to figure out how we can get that service in a different building. If we had that service in every building, it would be a tremendous help.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Abadia. And the other thing, when we're going around, if you could say if you are in agreement with what we're doing, like I said, it doesn't have to be an official vote, but just to make sure that we all are sort of on the same page with this, that would be great.
Yes. It's a tremendous amount of work over really several years, but I think it's brought us to this point. I think it makes sense.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Winters?
Thank you. Yes, I'm in agreement with not redistricting at this time. I just feel that Ms. Weathington did a really good job of laying the issues out. And when we looked at it, we felt that as a committee that after all the disruptions that happened due to COVID and all the changes that are coming going forward with all the bond construction that's going to be happening in the elementary schools, which is a new factor that we didn't really know about when we started this journey, this is just not the right moment to do it. I'm in favor of not doing it, but I'm also very much in favor of looking at some policies through P&L that might address some of the issues that were raised to start the conversation. I'm particularly interested in overcrowding issues in certain elementary schools and how maybe we could address that, not through districting, but through another policy. One that comes to mind is the open enrollment policy for elementary schools. I do know that there are some families in the district who have expressed that they would rather have their students go to an elementary school that's closer to their home rather than have them transported to where they're currently assigned to based on the current maps. I don't know how easy or hard that would be to do, but I'm in favor of allowing families that flexibility to attend an elementary school that is closer to their home. If there's room, if there's space for those children at that elementary school, if that would make that family's life easier and also alleviate some of the overcrowding in some of the other schools, it seems to me it would be a win-win situation. So I don't know how we get there, but that's what the committee is for, to look at those issues going forward. So, and I want to thank Ms. Fleischer for all her leadership on this issue. It really was a big lift for the committee and she did a fantastic job shepherding it through. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And you made some great comments, and so did Mr. Abadia. But it's interesting. I think we do have to be creative with this. And I think the open enrollment policy is something that is going to be interesting. And Mrs. Wethington had even brought it up. I think it's great to be able to work and, figure out how any challenges can be met with creative ideas. So thank you, Mrs. Winters. I appreciate it. Mrs. Arroyo.
I'm good with it. I think at some point, though, there will have to be continuous conversation, even outside of the policies. And an updated in a couple of years demographic study that would help align with redistricting elementary schools, and maybe a few years down the line, would we need to build a new school? I just think the conversation is going to have to happen at some point. But I do agree that right now, with everything, and I'm also a big, while I know the bond work is going to be a lot of work the next 5 years, I don't want that to be what stops the board from doing the work that it needs to do. Obviously, I don't want there to be a million disruptions, but I also don't want to be like, oh, 5 years, like 5 years ago, we could have done this, but we were focused on the bond, the building. So I don't want that to be a distraction from the things that need to be done as well. So that's just my perspective.
Great comments, Ms. Soraya. I agree. I think we all were in perspective of it's a growing district, and we feel it's the right decision now, but who knows down the road, and because we're always growing, and we are always changing. So thank you for keeping that, sort of in the back of our minds. But thank you for your support with this for now. Dr. Rood?
So first of all, I'm in favor of leaving things as they are with the elementary school redistricting. I do think we need to continue to think about what problems there are with if there is overcrowding or underutilization. One thing that I didn't see, and maybe I just didn't have access to it in a lot of the conversations, was what the kind of capacities are at the different school. And I know that's a loaded term because we can't really nail down an exact number for capacity necessarily, but maybe we can think of like, what is a goal number? Like, and if maps need to change, I think they could very easily change with assimilation over time. As kindergartners are enrolled, we can guide people into specific schools so that we can recreate the map, reduce busing if there's any other problems that we can fix. I don't think creating a drastic map change is really in our best interest. And I think that, that's the opinion of the committee and the district, and I'm on board with that. So let's just think of in a more iterative way over time, can we slowly improve things? And to do that, do we need to make policy changes or not? So that's where I am.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rood. You make a good point. And Mrs. Wethington, do you mind speaking on for 2 seconds about the capacity of the buildings and the issues that we've had with that, and how we figure out, how that works?
Yeah. Dr. Rood, we spent quite a bit of time talking about building capacity. So the building capacity that we're using is from the GRIP report, which is based on our long range facilities plan. That's not been updated in many years. So the capacity really is, as Dr. Malash said earlier, trying to like hold water. Isn't that what you said, Dr. Malash?
Trying to get a tight grip on 8 ounces
Tight
of
grip
water.
on 8 ounces of water. Yeah, like that's exactly what it's like. So, and then you're looking at the building capacity, for example, may say 375 kids, but if Dr. Mahan and I walk that building, there could be empty classes. There could be classes, special classes where, it impacts the capacity because we're serving maybe 6 kids in a class of students with autism, as opposed to 24 or 22 or 26 kids. So it shifts, and some buildings may have a music room. Some buildings may have a full library. Some buildings may have an art room. Some buildings may have art in a cart. So we try to create our own building capacity. We asked every principal to look at the number of rooms, look at the number of kids they could serve. It was there was such a disparity between what they created and what's in the GRIP report. We didn't feel like we could use it. So we talked to Mrs. Sugars, Dr. Mahan and I met to see if we could come up with a number. We just don't have anything better than what's in the GRIP report, although we know it's outdated.
Yes, Dr. Reed?
Yeah, so I definitely, that's why I said maybe like capacity is not a great number because we don't know, but like, I think that's great that you're going through the process of figuring out for each school with the administrators, what is, really, it's like, what's an ideal number? What's the number that we would want to best utilize each building and to make sure that nobody's overcrowded. And if we can kind of think about those, ideal numbers, and they're not real numbers, they're not numbers that like, we're like, we have to meet this number, or this is our absolute limit. They're numbers that are, our theoretical perfect number, and, such that each elementary school is operating well, and that they feed into the middle schools with acceptable numbers there, and that that the whole system works. That's really where I'm coming from with, saying that it'd be lovely to see those numbers. And I know that that's a hard thing to come by, and I'm not like making demands like, show me the numbers. I'm just saying, that's where I'm coming from.
Dr. Rood, we can share the GRIP numbers with you. That's easy. Yeah, that's all we have. That's it. That's the number.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Rood, for all your input. I appreciate it. Mr. Mayor?
So certainly, I agree with virtually everything I'm hearing, and I certainly am on board with not making any moves now, not redistricting for all the reasons that have been discussed. I think, to Dr. Root's point, having as best a grip as, no pun intended. No, I often do intend puns. This one I did not. We need to have as good a grip as we can on our demographics and what might they look like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, because there's going to, demographics shift. They're always fluid. We've seen that. We know, particularly so, demographic shifts over the last several years have affected class sizes, availability of resources. We need to be able to do more than just react to them. We want to be in a position to try and project forward. If that means policy changes or revisions, then certainly we need to look at doing that, hopefully in a way that doesn't burden staff that's already overburdened. I mean, looking at class sizes and raising them maybe an obvious fix, a quick fix, and maybe it's appropriate. I don't know. I know the committee will look at that, but let's be mindful of the stresses that we know our staff and teachers are already under, the stresses that the students, especially some of the younger students, are already under coming out of the pandemic. So, that I'm a little uncomfortable when I hear that, but I recognize that that's a tool that we might need to look at. Maybe there's ways to do that, that's responsible for the staff and for students as well. And to Ms. Arroyo's point, bond projects are critical. The community expects us to move. They expect the money to be used appropriately. We know that will happen. It will not in any way distract the board. It's not going to distract us from the rest of the work that needs to be done. And in fact, it's being done to support everything that the board does for the students and for the staff. So that's a valid observation, concern, but it's not one that is going to gain traction. We are not going to lose focus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mrs. Wethington, could you speak, or even Dr. Malash, about when we're talking about the policy? I think we're going to be talking about it more in depth in January, but when people hear possibly raising class sizes, we're taking this on very seriously, and it's not a big jump that we were talking about. There are, small little moves that can be made to help, a situation that we have for overcrowding for families that come in. I'm not sure if either one of you take that for me and explain.
So, Mrs. Fleischer, our current class size in grades K1, 2, and 3 is 22. That's actually a regulation, not a policy, just for clarification, because I called it a policy initially and then I had to correct myself. So what we're saying is there are lots of situations that happen in registration office where a family comes in and they may have a kindergartner, a fourth grader, and a fifth grader. So we may, let's just say they're going to Kingston because it's right here. We may have a spot in kindergarten, a spot in fourth grade. We don't have a spot in fifth grade. So what I'm suggesting is the board consider giving us the flexibility in some cases to add, a student to a section so I can accommodate the whole family. Now I have to move all of those children to another school, and so now parents are not in their home school. They have to make other accommodations. We try to put them in a school that's closest, but guess what? I may not have space for all three children in the closest school. I may not be able to send them to Payne or to Kilmer. It may be Barton. It may be Woodcrest, depending on where we have seats for every child. So I'm not saying we should have 30 kids in our classes by any stretch of the imagination, but in instances where we have that kind of situation, that flexibility would help the district and parents.
Thank you, Mrs. Worthington. That was an important point when we were talking about it with the committee, because we felt that it was important that we aren't, we're not making this blanket statement that we would want to raise any of the class sizes. However, part of the issue with the overcrowding is the fact of, like what Mrs. Worthington said, you're ending up having some families being pushed out and families being split up around the district. And we want to try to alleviate that best as possible, whether it's through that and talking about making like those tiny little incremental policy or procedural changes, or whether it's the open enrollment, just like what Mrs. Winter said. We have some creative ideas that we're trying to work out possibly in P&L to make this work and make it go smoother. Mrs. Stern.
Yeah, so I'm in support of not making any specific changes at this point in terms of redistricting at the elementary level. I am absolutely concerned about we have a couple of schools right now that have been identified as definitely significantly over kind of a lot of students. I'm going to use the word overcrowded because that's the word that's commonly used. And we, in looking at some of the numbers, how relevant the capacity question is in terms of, but there are some schools that show up as pretty significantly over capacity, however relevant that term is. When we talked about it a little bit, my understanding is there tends to be kind of waves, some years, for a period, of a few years, you tend to have one school or a couple schools that are more overcrowded. And then that changes, right? There've been, we had the GRIP study and then boom, the pandemic hit. And then this year we had 700 more kids register into our district. Some of them coming in, registering in August, in September, October. We have kids registering all year long. It's a really tough moving target. And I don't, envy the level of moving parts of that is. As a matter of fact, well, it's late. I won't go into it. But anyway, something about Steve Jobs is one of his first algorithms was figuring out school capacity. But anyway, school classes. What I would like to see is looking in a more creative way, which I think Mrs. Fleischer, you talked about in P&L. I'd love to see P&L look at, is there a more flexible way rather than a permanent redistricting? Is there a more flexible way to try to address overcrowding and give maybe a couple of schools some options of how to address that, so we balance that out a little bit? And then that if it's a more flexible way to do it through policy, then perhaps when these waves happen, we can be more responsive to them. And I think that's going to require us to look at really what are the kind of average period of times. Kids are in elementary school for 6 years. So, right. I question myself every time I say that. 6 years. Thank you for the validation of that. So, is 6 years, is that kind of are those the trends? Is it a 4 to 6 year time period that schools get overcrowded? Let's look at that. Let's see what the trends are and let's see how we can do it. I'm fully in favor of that.
Thank you. You make some great points. And I think that is one of the main things that we're going to be focusing on in P&L is like we said, like open enrollment wasn't very interesting. Actually, Mr. Avadi was wanting to point that out, that might be an intriguing way to bring this in. You know, it's already one of our policies, but it might be a different way to use it, right? And different ways to help alleviate things. Mrs. Weddington, is there any additional information that you would want to share with what Mrs. Stern said?
I don't think so. Like the open enrollment policy actually helps us with enrollment in schools that maybe may have more capacity than a comparable school, because parents who are opting to assign their child to another building literally frees up the space in that school for a child who may be coming in later in the school year or coming in August, which is later for us, but maybe not later for families. So that policy really does positively impact in most cases. And we would only provide that option if we had enough growth spaces in the school. So that goes hand in hand with being able to provide the open enrollment opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Weathington. So that's just one of the things, but I think it will be great to be able to be creative. So thank you, Mrs. Stern, for your comments. Mrs. Stratton? Elmer Stratton?
So I guess I have two questions. Number one, is there a best practice size for classes? Like, or is it just a regulation? Like, is there a magic number that says like teachers teaching this amount of kids are the best way to go? Okay.
There is no magic number. The most important thing is the teacher-student relationship. But no, there's no magic number. That's been a Cherry Hill number for maybe 8 or 9 years. It has not even been in existence, because I know we changed K3 and when Dr. Morton was at Kilmer, 2013 or 14, maybe.
The only thing that's changed in the recent past is kindergarten. We went from a half-day program to a full-day. Half-day program was 20 students. And then when it went to a full day, we increased it to 22. So there was parity for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. Fourth and fifth grade changed more than a decade ago, I believe, to 26. There was discussion about third grade at that time, and it did not change at that time. But kindergarten's the only one that has changed in recent past.
I only ask that because then if I just want to see where we are in terms of best practices, but if there's not one, then that's fine. We're just going off of regulations. That's optimal. Second thing is my favorite line for you. Does this make sense for you? It made sense to me. You made it make sense for me. Does it make sense for you? Is this exactly what you guys are saying is the best thing?
I think this is the best option, Mrs. Elmore Stratton. The new map would make a lot more sense visually than the existing map, but I really don't think that the community or the board or the district gets any great result back from that. You know, one of your top priorities was racial diversity. You don't make any traction in racial diversity at all. Cause a lot of disruptions. Busing improves for a small percentage of children. Lots of families are disrupted. Lots of staff are disrupted. I'm not sure there's a sufficient benefit to make it worth going in that direction.
Okay. So, I mean, besides the fact that I think it was Dr. Malash that shared with us that, hey, the lines hadn't been redrawn in 1 trillion years and they were wonky from when they got drawn. If this is the best, if this helps you to be successful and doesn't cause more disruption, I'm all for it, because I just want to keep stressing preschool, new schools, transportation. There's construction on 7 that's going to last 2 more years. 2024, all these babies are going to get born from COVID, being in a house. So, you know, we have a billion things that are on our plate. So if we could take this one thing off, I guess my other thought is, can this go to strategic planning? Because to everybody's point, like the baby boom number 2 or 3 is going to happen from everybody being trapped in the house. Can we predict that? Can we project that? Can we forecast that? And I don't want them worrying about that right now. Can we put that to strategic planning to think about?
I think that's great. We can definitely bring that to strategic planning also. I think it's a great idea. And if
Awesome. So I'm for
and
it.
if you start to see the population boom, just let us know and you can give us an update.
I mean, we have to think about it, right? I mean, the only other thing we can plan for is aliens coming, but we don't know. So let's just go with it. So
100-year alien.
yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Elmer Stratton. Mrs. Tong.
Oh.
I got to. You are, but
since I'm the last one, I'm in favor with you guys. I think it's not an easy job, but at the same time, we have so much thing going on. So let's keep moving for the next topic, which is my topic.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mrs. Tong.
No
So I
problem.
appreciate everyone's, agreement that we're going to be, saying that there's no elementary school redistricting right now at the present. This is where we are. It's the best for the districts. It's best for our students. And so I appreciate everyone's support. The P&L committee appreciates everyone's support. So when the other part of tonight is, since we were discussing the elementary school redistricting, the middle school redistricting that we spoke about in February came up again. And Mrs. Wethington, there was actually another revised recommendation that the administration is going to be making tonight. And Mrs. Wethington has another presentation just to talk about that.
I sure can, Mrs. Fleischer. So board members remember, in July 2021, we started the middle school redistricting conversation. Our charges at that time were to equitably redistrict middle schools, to start in the 23-24 academic year, to find creative redistricting options, and to report the findings to the board by December 2021, which we did. We started that work in July, presented our recommendations in December, and we did thought exchanges and town halls to solicit community feedback. And then the board finalized the boundaries in February 2022. Yeah, great. So when we established the boundaries in February, this is how we assign schools. Cooper, Hart, Sharp, and Stockton were going to Beck. Barton, Kilmer, Kingston, Knight, and Payne were assigned to Carusi, and Johnson, Mann, and Woodcrest were assigned to Rosa. So we've been working on middle school redistricting implementation. We have an implementation committee. We've been working for a few months now. As we've been doing elementary work, we've been doing middle school work also and making projections. When we projected out to 25-26, this is what the enrollment would look like, assuming that every student is in the same seat for 25-26. Beck would have 697 students. Carusi would have 1,102 students, and Rosa would have 547 students based on the assignment that we discussed in the prior slide. Some of the jump in the numbers is really a result of new students arriving in the district. So between August and November of this year, Carusi had 77 new students enroll. By comparison, during that same time period, Beck had 42 students enroll. Rosa is not really comparable in that conversation because students are assigned to Rosa in a different way currently because the old policy is in place for this current academic year. What compounds it is when you look at the schools that we said we're sending to Beck, Rosa, and Carusi, the sending schools that would be going to Carusi had 136 new students enrolling between August and November. Comparably, students going to Beck, sending elementary schools sending to Beck, there were 44 enrollees, 42. So the growth on the west side is double that on the east side. There's no way that we're going to be able to maintain that level of growth with the plan that we created last December. Last year, it was December 7th, 2021. So we have, we're asking the board to revise the recommendation. So we would assign Knight students to Rosa as opposed to assigning them to Carusi. That would give Carusi the relief that they need and give them a cushion for new students coming into the district. As I said earlier, the growth in the west side of town doubles that on the east side of town. So this would provide Carusi some relief. And if you could go to the next slide, Mr. Plavinsky, the numbers would then look like 697 for Beck, 877 students at Carusi, and 772 students at Rosa, a much better balance, especially when you're looking at the physical plants than the prior slide. This would require the board going back to look at the attendance area policy. We'd have to make a revision. We revised that policy when we selected the assignments. So we'd have to move night, if you see in letter B, from Carusi to Rosa. And Mrs. Fleischer, we could introduce that in January if the board was amenable.
Thank you, Mrs. Wethington. I'll take any questions from the board members right now. So this will, like what Mrs. Wethington said, this policy, if we're in agreement tonight, goes back into January. It will go through first, second readings. And there could be time for a lot of discussion with that. But in general, if people have any questions for myself or the questions for Mrs. Wethington, just let me know. I don't know if we have to go around to every single person or Mr. Mayor.
Just one quick question. Do the switch of the night students to Carusi, would that also provide some relief with regard to transportation, since that neighborhood is relatively close to Rose as opposed to Carusi?
Yes, that would.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Ravadia, did you have a question?
No, I mean, I think just for clarity, it comes through the January cycle because we're a lame duck board. This really crosses that line. But I think, no, I mean, I think the case is made, the administrative recommendation is clear. So all the best in January.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Ravadia. Mrs. Tong?
Yes, I guess maybe simple, but could be complicated. I'm not sure. I'd like to know about the square size of the Rosa, the Carusi in the back, due to the square footage per student. I guess if, you guys can calculate it and let us know that, the amount of student per, I think Rosa is the smallest school building. And then I just like to know the square footage of this per student and the size of each school. You don't have to give it to me tonight, I guess.
Mrs. Tong, I think that might be in the GRIP report. Did we share the GRIP report with all the board members, Dr. Malash? Mrs. Tong, I think the GRIP report has that information. There's a page for every school in the district.
So you fit in that
I
category?
think it's in
Okay.
there. Yes.
As long as you fit that, I have no problem.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tong. Mrs. Elmer Stratton?
Just for clarification, night and man, they go to east or west?
Man goes to east.
No.
Oh,
Children
open
coming out of
enrollment,
eighth grade
right, open
have the
enrollment.
opportunity to select
Go to either.
either one of the high schools.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad we made that plain because I
Yep.
did not know. Okay, so
They can go to whatever school they choose, Miss Elmer Stratton.
glad we said that out loud. All right.
Whatever high school they choose, clarification. Except for the alternative high school, you have to be assigned there with an IEP.
Got it. And then for the sixth graders, maybe this is for you, Mrs. Fleischer. The sixth graders, so next year, this would start in September?
So when we spoke about it, when we added the policy, this is to go into effect, correct, in the 23-24 school year.
And will there be special cases for the folks that say, and maybe this doesn't even happen, like if I have a sibling that's an eighth grader, will that whole thing happen? Like I got a kid at one school and then another kid at another school, but can I ask for them to both be at both? I don't know if that's even possible.
Didn't we discuss that? And I think we didn't discuss that in P&L committee. The committee would have to look at trying to think what policy that would be.
Let me just say, Ms. Wellington, one of the things that the board committed to last winter, when the discussions were taking place, is wherever children started middle school, right? So if you have children who are in middle school currently, they will be able to finish in middle school in that spot. If we have children, that, and most likely it would probably be children who are at Russell Knight currently. If you have a child who's in sixth grade at Carusi right now, and you have a fifth grader that's going to be in sixth grade at Rosa next year, we'll have a discussion about what that looks like if they would like to move their child so that the children are in the same school.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, they could stay split, right.
Okay.
Right.
Just because I know that was
That was a good question.
They're
That
gonna-
was a
yeah.
great question, because thank you for bringing that up. That was a great question, because we did have that discussion. And with the assurances that there was room, there's enough flexibility. If any of those situations happen, that could happen. So we are standing firm that whenever a child starts at a school for middle school, they can end at that school, no matter what happens with with this redistricting. Okay. Any further questions from any of the board members? Okay, well, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mrs. Wethington and your team for all this hard work and all your dedication to making sure this comes through. I really appreciate it.
Mrs. Fleischer, may I take a moment? I neglected to thank the members of the committee. So
Yes,
sorry,
please.
Committee members for their hard work for the many months that we've been talking about elementary school redistricting and now middle school redistricting implementation.
And I do also applaud them, the entire committee, because it was a lot of work. And thank you very much for helping us and bringing us all the information that we need to make these important decisions for our students. So thank you. Mr. Vadia?
Yes, Mrs. Tong, would you move, no, would you report out on strategic planning?
Yes, Mr. Overlay. Thank you for to give me the time to finally finish my the last one of the committee. The Strategic Planning Committee meet on November 29th, Tuesday of 2022. The committee discussed the formation of sustainability committees, which is one of the board goals for 2022 to 2023. Our president, Ben Avalia, stated that the district has an opportunity to become WE certified through the Sustainable New Jersey. We spoke about the needs to establish a committee with community members, staff, and students on it. Dr. Benjamin Rule stated that according to the goal, the committee need to be established this December. He expressed concern about being able to meet the timeline and asked how many slots there will be for each group of participants. Dr. Malaj stated that the letter of interest can be sent out by Janet Cohen, Mrs. Cohen. Ms. Barbara Wilson describes the district past involvement with Sustainability New Jersey. The program has all of the components mentioned as well as others. They are very supportive during the process and will walk the district through it. Benchmarks were easy at first to meet, but become more challenging and the facility could not meet the mark. Since more work will going on, this is a great time for the district to revive the environment. She will read over the material to see what has changed since the district last go around with the group. The committee discussed the pro and con of the solar in the district. Bond works need to be complete first before the district can take on another initiative. The committee further discussed the formation of the Sustainability Committee and short-term and long-term goal for the committee. It was decided that at the December 6th, which is today, 2022, meeting during the Strategic Planning Committee meeting report out an administrative recommendation and the formation of the committee will discuss with the full board. I guess we'll be talking later. Community engagement. Mr. Mayor spoke about the need to expand community engagement in the committee. He feels that committee members have to search out information that is not always easy to find, and there is a space for improvement. This topic does not really fit under the umbrella of any other committee. The committee discussed ways to improve communication, which includes town halls and revision to thought exchanges. The committee also discussed taking on state legislator issues such as HIP laws and working to make improvements. How can the district get parents more engaged in the student performance? Mr. Mayor add that this was recently discussed at the CPACE meeting. Mr. Avalia spoke about the committee ability to look at the interrelations of topics such as transportation and achievements. No other committees has this perspective. the committee further discuss committee engagement as this is to be added to the next committee agenda. All right. Of course, we have some public comments and she liked our committee that night. Wow, that's a lot to report tonight. I wonder, I'm going to open up. Do we have anything? Should I open up or do we have anything that I need to add? All right. Anybody want to add something to this, what I just read, or more questions? Go ahead, Dr. Wu.
I just want to add, since this strategic planning has gone to committee, I've certainly been enjoying being on the committee. And I looked to the board for ideas for what, like, one of the things that we talked about first, 2 months ago was what can strategic planning be? Like, what can we take on? And I think it's a great place to have kind of an incubator, a place to brainstorm and think up like new directions, to bake new ideas. So that means that we need board members who don't sit on the committee to talk with us and share ideas and talk about things that don't fit in a committee right now and talk about how we can bake that a little bit better in strategic planning so that it can move to other committees for greater action. So I think that's an exciting opportunity for the board going forward.
Yes, indeed. Ms. Obadia, go ahead.
Yeah, just as a process person, there's something to think about, which is the board creates annual district goals. This is one we really set for ourselves in terms of a sustainability committee. But in order to stay on track with what we've committed to for district goals, we have to be in a position today to basically, I don't want to say direct, but to ask Dr. Malash to really curate the other members of a steering committee for sustainability that would form this month. That's the goal. I don't want to be a stickler for goal necessarily, but I mean, I think if we can come together as a board today and do that, Dr. Rood, as Mrs. Tong noted, had concerns about getting community involvement because of how time pressured we are right now. But the first time the committee really acts, the sustainability that's envisioned in the district goal is March. So it gives us some time. But to populate it, we would want an administrative liaison. And then we talked about like 3-4 staff, start in-house, start within our locus of control. I think that's something we should, maybe Mrs. Tong, if you could just get a sense of the board, because the committee can't direct that, right? We're non-quorum, but the board can. The board can ask Dr. Malash to take that action. So I think that's the only thing I think that's really movable today. And I would suggest that it should be, gotten the sense of.
I will go through the rooms and ask everybody. All right, we'll start with Mr. Mayor. That way I won't skip.
Go ahead, Dr. Root, let Dr. Root.
Okay, go ahead, Dr.
I just want to add some flavor into that idea. What we talked about in the strategic planning is that we would like to have a committee that's a little bit more inclusive. We want students to sit on that committee. We want members of the community who feel passionate about sustainability to sit on that committee. We want faculty who are passionate about this to sit on the committee. We want people from many different schools. That's becoming that's a big thing. And with the board goal with the goal that we imposed of having a committee for December, like we're not going to have that whole committee. So what I had suggested, and I think Mr. Ovadia is talking about, is, and what we should direct the conversation to tonight, is we would like to start with a core group. We would like to solicit a recommendation from the, I think it'd be good to solicit a recommendation from the district for a couple of teachers and an administrator who would start as kind of the core group of the sustainability committee. And they would then take on the charge of building the committee and coming up with a mission statement for March. That was the tone of what we talked about at the strategic planning committee meeting. So if anybody wants to kind of correct me or reframe anything that I said, feel free.
I think that's exactly right, Dr. Rude. And to the Mr. Avadia's point, if the ask now is of the board to request Dr. Malash or the administration to begin to source the appropriate staff personnel to be that core group, I'm in support of asking for that this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Ms. Fletcher, you have anything?
Nothing, thank you. I think all the work is great and I love the idea about, the inclusive group working on the strategic plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Ms. Cohen?
Yeah, I'm for it if it makes logical sense, but if it's just a meeting to have another meeting or a committee to have another committee, I don't want it to be, I want it to have some tangibles that has to come out of it, or will, not has to, but will come out of it, because we're very good at building subcommittee and intermediary committee and the committee of the committee. And then it's like we just doing busy work. So if it's not going to have anything tangible to come from it, then I would say let's not add one more thing to our plate. So
what we talked about in the meeting, the plan with this core group. So the district goal is to have a sustainability plan by the end of the academic year, with the first goal to set up the committee, the second goal to come up in March to come up with a mission statement, and then finally to have that committee put forward a plan for the district, a plan for sustainability, whatever that might mean. That's not baked right now. We don't, that's the committee's, what that committee is going to do. So this isn't a committee to have a committee. I appreciate that. That's true. We are a lot of committees. This is a committee with a, what I envision a very specific objective of building a plan, which we currently do not have in the district, but which we have included as one of our district goals. So that'll be the purview of the committee. And yes, one of the, so this core group will find others to be the full committee, come up with that mission statement and put forward a plan.
Thank you, Dr. Wu, for clarifying it. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. It's long-term planning, so it takes. This is going to be being on the board for the past 4 years, I think I'm actually just start thinking about the strategic committees right now. There was not really a true meeting in this group because we're so big looking for the long-term goal. Okay. Ms. Stern, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it's great. I'm excited. I'm a big fan of sustainability. I try to practice it in my own life, and I love the idea that we're, incorporating it, and that I like that we're meeting our goals. That's really important. So I think this is exciting. I like the idea also of the engaged, multi-stakeholder group. However, I do get concerned about a very large group because it's becomes unwieldy. So, that's my only kind of cautionary thought, but I think there are some nice steps we're taking on all of our goals, some more than others. Some we're going to actually finish and offload, which will be exciting. So, but this is great work. Thank you. And I think it's a good model too, especially this new group in terms of engaging community members more and more. I think we have that in our goals too. So I like that we're moving in that direction.
All right, our president, Mr. Ryan, go ahead.
Yes, I just, so for the committee, there's some really good resources in district and in the state that have already committed to helping us out. Mrs. Wilson, I don't want to put you on the spot, but since I've already done it. And then we met Mrs. Wilson's friend at NJ SBA. So there's definitely people who could guide us to some stuff, but I think the bigger piece could be very exciting. It's timely. I think the thing is, it's not just about being sustainable. It's also, there's curricular pieces that go into it. There's trades pieces. There's a lot of, there's always that stat of 30% of the jobs for 20 years from now don't exist today. This is where a lot of them will be. So I think it's exciting. Well done.
Our next speaker, Miss Gina Winters.
Thank you. Yes, I'm in favor of it, and I'm even more excited to see the strategic planning committee kind of find its footing and how excited and passionate Dr. Rude clearly is about this issue, because I think it's going to be a huge one moving forward for our district. So thank you so much for taking the lead, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
All right, our last one, Miss Rosie. Go ahead.
I like it. I think it's a good idea. My background in education is sustainable building and green construction. And I have published papers in it. So I like the idea that this is the direction you guys are going in.
Great. We found our community member starting next year.
Oh, I'm sorry. Aiden, go ahead.
No worries. I just wanted to add, I think an important piece of this that this committee should consider, and I hope this doesn't get kind of lost in the process. And so, as we are finding these committee members and kind of handing it over to them, I hope this will be part of the directive, is that the reason we're here doing this is because the sustainability plan the district already had kind of lapsed. There was like a 3-year sustainability plan that the Board of Education passed. I think it was 2014 and expired in 2017. It could have been 2017, expired in 2020, but there was a 3-year plan that the board passed, and then it kind of just never got renewed or followed up on. So what I hope will be in the directive to this new committee is make this plan, the sustainability plan, one that includes like a renewing factor, where if we say this is a 3-year plan from 2022 to 2025, that committee should be charged with saying, okay, the last step in that plan is to come back in 2025 and say, what are we doing in the next 3 years? Because otherwise, someone on the board is going to be saying in 2027 strategic planning, we should really have a sustainability plan.
Anybody else want to add on? I guess not. Mr. Valia, your turn.
As I'm fond of saying, action was promised and action shall be delivered. So for our special action agenda, Mrs. Arroyo, could you please move C&I?
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following: 17.1, approval of attendance of conference and workshops for the 2022-23 school year. 17.2, approval of service agreements between the board and Brett Denovi and Associates LLC to provide behavior consultation analysis. I have a second. Is that what I'm asking for right now? Any questions? Okay, Ms. Sugars.
Okay, board members, the online voting is open. You may cast your votes. We have a unanimous yes vote.
Ms. Stern, will you move BNF?
Clearly, the blood sugar is dropping. Sorry. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following: approval of bill lists 18.1, 18.2, resolution for the award of transportation. 18.3, resolution approving 403B, Roth 403B, and 457, the plan provider. 18.4, resolution authorizing the investment of the funds in the New Jersey Asset and Rebate Management Program. Yay. And 18.5, action consent to approve business and facilities items numbers 18.1 through 18.4. Are there any questions? Can I have a second? Mr. Mayor, are there any questions? Green says there are no questions. Mrs. Sugar. He wants to start his long drive home. Mrs. Sugars, if you could open the voting, please.
Online voting is open. Board members, you may cast your votes. We have a unanimous yes vote.
Thanks. Mrs. Elmore Stratton, would you please move the HR agenda?
I have to say them all. I have my braces in. Okay. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Okay, 19.1 termination of employment certificated. 19.2 termination of employment non-certificated. 19.3 appointment certificated. 19.4 appointment certificated. 19.5 assignment, a salary change certificated. 19.6 assignment salary change non-certificated. 19.7 other compensation certificated, and 19.8 other compensation non-certificated, and finally 19.9 approval of sidebar agreement. Do I have a second? Mrs. Fleischer, any questions? Okay, thank you. Mrs. Sugars?
Okay, the online voting is open. You may cast your votes. We have a unanimous yes vote.
Thank you. Mrs. Fleischer, would you please move P&L?
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following: 20.1, the approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation decisions. Do I have a second? Mrs. Elmore Stratton, any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars, could you open the voting, please?
Online voting is open. You may cast your votes. We have one abstention, Mrs. Stern, and the rest are yes votes.
Okay, no items today to move for strategic planning. Anyone with new business on the board? Okay, old business? All right, then we have gotten to second public comment. No, what was that on? All right, second public comment. This is the second one. If you'd like to speak, your name and municipality should be how you start, please. We'll alternate between in the room, and we owe someone to really be first, and so we'll honor that. 3 minutes. There's a timer. Please be nice and energetic, because it's been great. So, all right, the floor is yours.
I'm the vice president of the cheer, East Cheer Squad.
Let's just slide that microphone down.
And acting
just so- yeah,
secretary.
Thank you.
Is that okay? So we did send you out a letter of advocacy for an assistant coach for the team. It looks like I might have needed to send it out to a few more people, but anyway, I'm not here to reread it, but I do want to emphasize a few things and on why we really need this. And I actually can't believe that we forgot to put this part in, but you all can Google what, even while I'm saying this, is cheerleading a dangerous sport? And what you will come up with is, compared to other sports, the overall number of injuries is actually low. However, cheerleader injuries are often much more severe, making up 50 to 66% of catastrophic injuries in female athletes. Catastrophic meaning brain or spine injuries. So far this year, just what I know about personally, there's been somebody with 2 concussions and another person or young woman with 1 concussion. That concussion lasted more than the 2 weeks that they usually last. That's usually a period of time, lasted 4 weeks, and they needed some physical therapy for nystagmus. in the eyes, which I'm also a nurse. I'm an RN BSN, and I worked in pediatrics a lot of my years, both 13 years at Cooper and 9 years at CHOP. And now I just saw an article lately about nystagmus being related with dementia. So, and we all know about CTE. So it's a big concern because the sport has no, protective gear. And they do lots of stunting. And as we all know, all of the sports have evolved over the years. Back in 1900, the sport was all men, but when World War II came around and the men went to war, it became women, and it's women today, and it's much more higher precision. We only have one coach. We have 20 to 25 cheerleaders. And when one of those cheerleaders goes down, that's one less cheerleader to assist that team to be safe. With only one coach, that coach cannot look at all the stunts all the time, which means that they're learning slower, they're learning safely slower, and which just causes it's cause and effect, right down the line. There might be more injuries because of that. So we are really strongly advocating having more than one set of eyes on our young athletes who can also get scholarships through cheerleading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay. Well, public comment 2, I could quickly report, is not going to be like public comment 1. So we do have some takers. Next on my list anyway online is Carolina Bevid.
Hi, Carolina Bevid, Cherry Hill. First, I'd like to say I'm pleased to hear that elementary redistricting is not going to be pursued. But I'd also like to say that I feel like that was the obvious conclusion. Some of the things that were mentioned were things that community members had commented on, I think earlier, just that this is unnecessarily disruptive for a group of kids who have been extremely disrupted over the past couple of years. So I hope this meeting in general can be a recalibration of Cherry Hill's priorities, because what I heard in that first presentation was that we have some work to do academically in our school. When you look at our board goals, I don't even see academics listed. The first goal is student wellness. So I'd just like to remind us that schools are not mental health clinics. And while it's important that we look for red flags and reach out to families with resources about students that there are mental health concerns about, I feel like our district has just lost sight of the fact that our job is to be a school, which is like to teach reading, writing, history, science, and math. So I hope that we can really start focusing on those things and improving those things, because I listen to a lot of board meetings and I don't hear those things discussed much. So it just seems like a problem to me. Secondly, I've been advocating for a couple weeks now for an emphasis on handwriting instead of typing, and to take a step away from a reliance on technology in elementary school. And that is a simple and free actionable item that can be implemented immediately that would improve language arts proficiency also immediately. So I really, really recommend taking a look at that and making a policy for our elementary schools on when it's appropriate to use technology. I'd also just finally caution against us designing our own assessments or only using our own assessments to measure our own success. Sometimes an outside audit does shed important light on problems that we may not be recognizing. So yes, while I believe that reaching goals that we set for ourselves and those benchmarks are important, a test designed by an outside entity to measure academic achievement can also be a useful tool to measure academic success. Thank you.
Thank you. We're back in the room. Mr. Short, floor is yours.
Rick Short, 1002 Charlton Parkway. I do concur with Ms. Bevitt, and I do concur with Ms. Stratton. Ms. Stratton's comments about actually taking action on going green. So my tonight's speech is two-part green. First off, unfortunately, right now I believe the AP rooms are being designed, and with any building design, it should have green built into it. It's pretty simple stuff, and hopefully it's being done. Hopefully when you get the plans and you see there's no windows in it, you say, hey, architect, this doesn't look too green. Also, we have plans of putting 10 roofs on. Are they going to be painted white to deflect heat, or are they going to be painted black? Simple stuff to go green, folks. And then moving down the line is on the levels of green is you got to ask yourself, you know, when you drive up 322 at night in Pennsylvania, you drive past the school during the day, you see it, and then you drive past it during night and all the lights are off, and you start saying, why does the school turn all their lights off? Well, maybe it's part of going green. I just recently audited our PSE&G bill. There's a section in there called various locations for electric. And I think, and I'm just hypothetically guessing here, that $70,000 a year is spent on these big PSE&G lights at like Rosa, at West, and at East. I mean, they're great, they're bright, but do we really need them? Are Pennsylvania schools really turning all their lights off at night? Can we set up some kind of motion stuff? Moving on to the bond. You know, there's a lot of inaccuracies that can be easily proven. One prime example is $2,500 doors at West. When you multiply that by 5,000, or no, excuse me, when you multiply that by 4,000, that's $500,000. So either the $2,500 price is right, or the $2,500 price is wrong, because all the other doors in the district are $4,000. So when you multiply 3,100 times 4,000, or times that's anyway, the numbers don't add up, and it could be money used somewhere else. And finally, with the last, I hope we concentrate on safety, things like sprinkler systems that we don't need to put in, but we don't need fire retardant doors either. So maybe we could save on fire retardant doors and put sprinklers in. And let's not forget the parking bollards for when drop-offs happen, because we never want to see an unnecessary accident. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to move to the line with Ann Einhorn.
And I'm on Cherry Hill. So I just want to say that your board goals are provide an inclusive and a supportive learning environment for student needs or to student needs. So I have some questions about your discussion on elementary schools. And given the fact, I think the number of 700 new students have enrolled this year, regardless of whether it's all elementary or other schools. I also have a concern with moving one of the highest performing elementary schools to Rosa. It was always my understanding that children learn from other children, and I don't think that would support the current middle school environment. So what elementary schools are currently overcrowded? And if they are, what are we doing about diversity across the board? And what will the class size be? And what is the capacity of each and every elementary school currently? I'm assuming you'll have to revise your 8110 attendance area policy, as well as the class size policy 2312, which hasn't been revised since 2006. When you're talking about hiring for new hires under BNF, I think the board needs to seriously consider going to a 2% increase to help cover family coverage for our new hires, because that is one of our sticking points with getting people to stay here. I'd also like to see you consider putting back basic skills teachers, given the last 2 years in our elementary schools. With no offense to anyone, teachers really need more help for struggling students, and not another level of management. We really need to do something about class size, particularly looking back at the last 2 years. and the detriments of COVID, unfortunately, and socialization, et cetera. But if we're going to provide an inclusive and supportive learning environment, we need to make sure the staff is there to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're back to the room. Yes, Dr. Yaris.
Dr. Yoni Yaris, Cherry Hill. Starting on the grants topic, considering how good our internal team was on that, could we work on doing more PD for our district team members to empower them to go after grants? Our internal people know us best, and an external grant writer is not invested in us. People who work for us are invested. Or to figure out shifting over to a way to include that in a position that we're being during the BNF process. Cherry Hill likes Cherry Hill. Grants and consultants do consulting, and they're not invested. They're out for the most amount of money. And I think we need to bring people on that are going to deeply invest and try to cover that. Assessment and test scores. We don't know what those scores mean. The state doesn't even know what they mean at this point. Learning loss has become a talking point and a headline. We do have really high quality internal assessments that are based on our curriculum. I believe the first module was just done across the elementary schools. I think it'd be helpful to look at those scores compared to the prior year score, and that could really measure what's going on versus the state trying to give abstract numbers and not really being great assessments. Then they've known that for 20 plus years at this point. Those of us who look at test scores and things like that, you really can't make a quality standardized test. On that note, colleges have moved away and figured out this and have really canned SATs and ACTs. And I think next up with the Elementary and Secondary School Act, which governs elementary school and education in this country, I think we're going to see a move from test scores being used as a metric to measure across the country. In terms of the preschool expansion, I'm very excited for this to be exploring this. We can't assume that the state's going to keep coming back to us. For years, those of us who have been doing fair funding and begging for the state to bring us to the dance, it's finally happening. So I think it's really exciting in that process, and for the next board to really look at a serious exploration of that. This is a major funding source, and a full universal preschool is coming from the current governor, and we should jump on that ASAP. In terms of the bond and strategic planning, I think it's time to move forward and stop talking about the bond in a way. It's done, we did it, and really be exploring as a district what happens next. I've been saying that for the last couple of times. So I think in January for the new board to get together and really have a long dedicated retreat on a strategic vision with the administration to get together. Speaking of administration, I think we're really lucky that we have administration that can think 10 steps ahead and realize that in 3 or 4 years, we're gonna have a really big problem at Carusi and go back to the board right now, even before we've implemented the middle school restructuring, saying we need to go back and re-examine that. That is not something we should take for granted. And I sincerely appreciate that happening now versus a year from now and looking again and going roughly. And then also with the transition ahead of that, with potential of having families with multiple kids in multiple schools, being mindful when you look at back to school nights and other challenges that families don't have that conflict, and really make sure that even if it happens to 1 or 2, that's still 1 or 2 families being faced with an impossible challenge who want to be involved. And thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you. All right. We're going to go to Alex Balmer next on the line.
Hi, I'm Alex Balmer from Cherry Hill. Just to introduce myself briefly, I have 2 sons who currently go to Woodcrest, and I'm was an engineer and now a manager for the United States Navy, and I'm on the board of a local environmental organization called Sustainable South Jersey. I called in just because with the passing of the bond, I think the board has a really great opportunity to consider sustainability when they're investing in facility upgrades. Everything from considering solar panels when we're doing roofs to looking at HVAC and better air conditioners. And I was excited, I guess, to hear when listening in about the formation of a sustainability committee. I think something like that's critical to make sure the board has people with the right background and expertise to advise them on a lot of new technologies and new laws, even including the Inflation Reduction Act that have done a lot to encourage sustainability. So that's something I'm happy to be helped with in the future, and would just like to encourage the board to keep looking at that. I'll give the rest of my time back here. Thanks.
I think, Alex, if you can share your information with Dr. Malash, his email is very accessible, although we also know where he'll be on the 20th. But anyway, but that thank you for that that offer. Okay, back to the room. Okay. Anybody in the room? Right. Floor is yours.
Alana Yaris, Cherry Hill. I work during the day and I cannot attend conferences for my children during the day. So I sign up for evening conferences. I know that there are 2 evening conferences for the week. It happens to be that I will be on a business trip during the evening conferences offered this week for elementary school. So I went tonight to elementary school evening conferences, which conflicts with a board meeting where there was rumored to be a presentation for elementary school redistricting. Last year, the Tuesday board meeting that conflicted with evening conferences was for middle school, where middle school redistricting was presented. So although not all conflicts can be avoided, if things that greatly affect people in the community who cannot attend because of conferences or other things in the district that are important for their students, if the board and administration could look at not scheduling important presentations such as those on those evenings, that would be great. And second, I have come and spoken a bunch of times about parties that exclude some of our students because there are rooms set up for if they do not celebrate those holidays. And I'm going to continue to state how schools should not have opt-outs during the day. If it's something after school or on the weekend and it's an opt-in and families can opt in for it, then that should be okay. But if it's something during the school day that children are required to attend school and they need to opt out because of that holiday that they don't celebrate, maybe that party should not be celebrated in school. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, this is a phone number, 7891 on the line, then the floor is yours. Oh, we just need you to just need you to unmute and start sharing.
Hello? Yeah, hi, this is Jeff Potowitz again. I didn't click off on this number. Okay, so I'm gonna try this. I'm sorry. Okay, I recently read an article about STEM. One was entitled "Why Are Students with Disabilities So Invisible in STEM Education" from July 2020 in Education Week. Please read it. It states students with disabilities are less likely to complete high school than other students. But why? There are certainly many social and societal factors that serve as barriers, but school and classroom practices are contributing factors as well. Elementary students with disabilities tend to be tracked away from advanced academic endeavors. In secondary school education, few students with disabilities take AP or IB classes or enroll in STEM classes or programs. Students with disabilities account for about 12% of the student populations in secondary school, but only 1% of the students in advanced placement courses. The authors of this is Mr. Shunwell and Dr. Janelle Johnson. Question: for students in the Cherry Hill School District that have had IEPs or 504s in elementary school and continued having an IEP or 504 into 11th grade, did our school district facilitate their entry into STEM fields? Does the school district facilitate and support these students' entry into the higher level courses and AP courses in the STEM fields? Note, okay? Note also, when it comes to funding, anything less than what Chesterfield gets per student, we are being cheated. And it sounds like you're going to need more money. And one way to do it is get the funding that we really deserve from the state with everything we do. I don't think you're going to do that. But we need another $5,000 a student. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Audience? All right, we're going to stick on the line with Beth Becker.
Hello, Beth Becker, Cherry Hill. Just three things. First, I'm really excited about the opportunity for universal preschool, and I think that it could really affect in a positive way the opportunity gap issue we're seeing. I just still can't wrap my head around the logistics or finances of how we're going to do that. So I'm really looking forward to those conversations and hope a lot of those conversations happen in a public forum. The second thing was the elementary redistricting. In some of the conversation about building capacity, it seemed like it was kind of a foregone conclusion. You know, some schools have art carts and some schools have art classes, and that's just the way it is, and that's fine. And that's part of how, that's part of what capacity means. But I thought that part of the elementary school redistricting was to make sure that the schools had equitable resources so that, every school has an art classroom, or every school has space for instruments. The bond is taking care of some APR stuff, but it just seemed like some of the capacity issues at the elementary schools were kind of skipped over, like, well, that's just how it is, instead of, how do we fix those that are not ideal. The third thing is on the middle school redistricting. This wasn't in the presentation, so I would just like to ask if the committee looking at the middle school redistricting, again, because I've asked this a few times, if you looked at class size in this change, a school can have 300 kids but have bigger class sizes than a school with 1,500 kids. So looking at pure numbers of bodies and buildings doesn't necessarily indicate anything. What's the percentage of capacity? What's the class size? What's the capacity for special education programs? Those are the numbers that I think a lot of us on this end we're more concerned about than pure bodies in each building, especially when the buildings are so different from each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, that concludes public comment too, so we'll turn to superintendent comments next. Dr. Malash.
Thank you, Mr. Avadia. Excuse me. Thank you for everybody that called in and took the time to speak and share their perspectives. Yes, they're with the middle school piece. They are taking a look at what does that look like in terms of class size, not just overall enrollment. Overall enrollment certainly is impacted by the size of the school. Class size certainly is part of that discussion. It's always going to be a range at the middle school as it is at the high school. It's not as clean or as pure as it is at the elementary school because of the different types of classes to which students are assigned and the way that programmatically children are assigned or programs are assigned to buildings. We've actually expanded the opportunity for STEM category in terms of classes, STEM classes at the secondary level, at the high school level. Dr. Morton, Dr. Goldthorpe, Dr. Perry, Dr. Damon, the team of teachers at the secondary level have done quite a bit to expand STEM opportunities at the high school level. We certainly always try to have opportunities that are individual on evenings. In the month of December, there's always invariably ends up being conflict with the way things are balanced just because we run out of nights, right? There's a certain number of nights, a finite number of nights that shifts a little bit every year. We look at building the calendar. Mrs. Wilson starts with the school folks back in the spring, to build the calendar. The Board of Education meetings are scheduled, and advertised starting back in January. We try to avoid, where it is. Advantageously tonight, the discussion about elementary and middle school did not begin until after elementary conferences ended. Whether that was by design or just worked out in terms of where we are, kind of worked out in that manner. There's definitely ongoing discussions about parties at the elementary schools between, Dr. Mahan meets with the elementary principals or discussions with zone PTA and this building-based PTAs as well. Mr. Baumer definitely send me an email. We'll follow up, have additional discussion. Dr. Yaris, thank you for your comments. Ms. Einhorn, you asked a number of questions. There will have to be some policy discussion. There's the possibility about policy revision. Earlier on in the evening, we definitely talked about a request and a need that's been identified with basic skills teachers and additional supports within our schools. It's one of the things thematically that's come out at the elementary schools as I've visited with the schools, just about the needs of the students and where they are right now and how that is compounded, especially at the elementary level. The going green, Mr. Short, as you talked about with the transition, with work that's being done as part of the referendum, invariably there's going to be a tremendous improvement in many of the systems, systems that are going to be designed and installed in 2023 and beyond are going to be much more sustainable and much greener than the ones that we have that are 50, 60, and 70 years old in some of our buildings. So there's a piece of that that's going to be a natural piece that goes through, and working with the engineers and the design group, that's participating in that work. That certainly is an important piece. We can absolutely have on additional discussion, about the PSE&G bills, and about what's paid for. I can say that our schools, it's definitely different riding by our elementary schools at 9 o'clock at night than it is riding by our high schools and sometimes our middle schools. We do have, one of the first the steps that the district took a number of years ago, was with the sensors, for the lights. So there's the automatic shut off and, things like that. The secondary schools, you're going to see lights on more in the evening than you are, during the course of the elementary schools. That mix. Ms. Bevid, again, your comments absolutely focus. The board was clear in their comments this evening about the importance with the focus academics. When you look, in the board goals, there's a primary focus on academic achievement, right? There's a foundation of where we are. We also, though, believe in as professionals in working with children. Children have to be able to be in the right frame of mind to be able to learn. If we can't, have them in a space where they feel supported and feel connected and feel a part of what's going on, the academic piece is dramatically challenging in terms of what's there. And Ms. Schutz, thank you again for coming out, for staying, speaking during the second public comment. The board, I will make sure that the board has all received. I don't know if they were all copied on the email. I will make sure that the full board has received the letter that's come from the cheerleading boosters. Just a last piece, I'm grateful, and I'm appreciative of the board and being your expressiveness and thanking the members of the administrative team and the teachers and the staff members that put a significant number of hours into the presentations that were done this evening. Thank you to Mrs. Holmgren for the work that she did. A number of you mentioned Joseph, the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat last week. It was a wonderful show. High School East, as their fall show opens, it's the second show that they've done this year, opens on Friday night. It's Canterville Ghost, a very entertaining and enjoyable show. It'll be Friday and Saturday, the 9th and the 10th, and next Friday and Saturday, the 16th and the 17th. Get the opportunity, encourage you to purchase a ticket. You can buy tickets that are online. Our winter concerts are also coming up. Mr. Kane and Miss Lousy directed the All Cherry Hill Elementary Choir last night at High School West. Was a fantastic showing. We have our middle school concerts and our high school concerts are coming up through the month of December and into January. So check on the website, and we encourage folks, even if you don't have children in those schools, go out and see it. You will enjoy the evening. And I think, Mr. Avadi, that's probably enough from me.
Okay, let me check a couple dates with you, Dr. Melange. So still the plan to sell the bonds on December 8th?
It absolutely, not only is it the plan, it's what's going to happen.
Woo! All right.
on Thursday, on December the 8th. Look for, we expect that we will release something, Mrs. Wilson, probably later in the afternoon, after everything is finalized. We are very excited. We've heard through our financial advisors, and folks that are engaged in the process, there's very strong interest in the purchasing of the $300 million in bonds. So we are really excited about what's going on. Again, this is the next significant step in that process. We'll have additional discussion about what that looks like after they are sold. We'll be able to let folks know, what does the interest rate look like? Where are we with all of that? So expect that we'll put something out, just in confirming on Thursday evening, late afternoon, early evening, to the community about the sale of the bonds. So yes, very excited.
Okay, then two more dates to highlight. You heard it here many times, but I'll call it out again. We are looking for staff for a variety of positions. It's a rewarding career, and it's a great district to work for with the support of your Board of Education. So December 15th, 4 to 7 at West Diversity Job Fair. Please come. All are welcome.
December
15th.
Correct.
Oh, sorry. What? Okay. In my mind, it was 15th. I don't know what I said.
15th.
The 15th.
Yes, you're correct. You said the right one.
Okay.
I was processing.
Okay. All right. But then I wanted to, okay. No, it's fine. I make more mistakes than get it right. I will say, that, the board formally says goodbye to Mrs. Arroyo and myself on, December 20th. That's the last time you'll see us in this format. We're expecting such a big crowd. We will not be in this room. We will be in the APR. And, for whatever differences you've had with Mrs. Arroyo or myself, we are expecting just a bevy of love and affection. I will say this, we will have 3 plaques that evening. We will also be recognizing, the leadership and the service of Ms. Friedel, who I have invited to join us, and I believe she will be in attendance as well. So it'll be a thing. It'll be our last thing here. So anyway, so come, bring tissues, stories. If tonight's any indication, bring food. I make a motion now to adjourn. Do I have a second? Okay, Mrs. Winters, all in favor, say aye. All right, we are adjourned.